Okay, so let me go ahead and go through the comments from the prior video, and I guess just to state it again, the question on the record again. So I'm combining a variety of different comments made by Mr. Oliva regarding acquiring his property, using CARES Act funds, and Meg was providing a response.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Oliva. As members know, and Mr. Oliva knows, Mr. Constant and I put forth an amendment to AO 2020-66 that premises the purchase of, the purchase of the Beans building on also the acquisition of the illegal property. However, it does not specify a funding source.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Ron, if you're listening, you haven't testified, but I don't think this is arguable. It's not offensively, but you're better. Other two have testified. And they were very eloquent, your daughter especially, and they don't support this. And so I hope that if this amendment were to pass, then your daughter might come back and tell us something differently, because I weigh my relationship with all of your family very valuable.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, let me go ahead and go through some of these other ones. I guess just a sort of a informational, if members are interested, during the mayor's update, which he gave from the 12 to 1 hour, which I think you can find the recording on the Facebook Live on the mayor's page. Jason? Okay. So if members are interested, you can hear more from the mayor regarding the proposal that we have before us. So that was a comment that was made, specifically AO 2020-66. He talked about it during the 12 to 1 COVID-19 update. Will the various proposals be posted somewhere? If so, when, and where can we find them? So this was a discussion that was had earlier on creating a website where we could put all of these different proposals and ideas for the public to view and provide comment on. So look for that to come soon, hopefully sooner rather than later. Barbara, can we email the Zoom link to people who can't find it again? Thanks. Is this meeting being recorded? Yes, there's going to be the Facebook Live recordings as well as a audio recording, and is the Zoom also being recorded?
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of different recordings. So yes, you will be able to review the first half of the meeting or all of the meeting if you missed part or all of it. Okay, those were all of the comments that we received. So now I think we're going to the folks on the phone. Turn it back to Shelley.
Okay, thank you, Felix. So yeah, for folks on the phone, meeting Pete and John, hoping to hear your project ideas. And again, the big categories of things that we're hoping that you can share is a description of the project, the potential dollar amount, and then if you have a sense of like the short or the longer term investment piece, that would be super helpful. So I will start, yeah, I'm sorry. And what bucket? So if you have a sense, although I'm sort of cheating and starting to do that already myself, and I can share that with everyone after we've had opportunities for everyone to provide their project ideas. So we'll start with you, Pete, if you are on and ready to share with us. Not on yet?
Not yet.
Okay. How about you, John? Are you ready to share project ideas?
Yeah, he's there.
Yeah, sure.
think some of the, just start off with general things without dollar amounts because they've been covered mostly by other subject members. And there's great ideas here. I really appreciate what we're headed here. And one is just a general view, you know, I think rent assistance I have a better comfort with than the moratorium on evictions. A couple things, the Eagle River Nature Center and Alaska Zoo, if we get institutional kind of supports, and I don't have dollars for those, I know they contacted us. And then we funded trail work and the wildfire work and so on, and I think we were anticipating more of that to get some jobs. So at some point, I'd like to make sure we leave more money available after evaluating the success of those programs in a month or so. Something that I've talked about, well, I guess one thing, delayed inventory tax, which we did, thank you everybody. And then decrease or eliminate the 10% penalty on property tax late payments. And it's really only out there now. I mean, most have paid already through their escrow, so it's fairly small amount. So it's more, I think, businesses that were closed that really faced the struggle. But if that, so if we had $2.5 million in the budget for that. If half's already paid, with or without a penalty, we're down to at a maximum of $1.25 million for that. I'm sure it'd be substantially less. And it's just 10%, remove that penalty on property tax if it's paid by the end of the year. And again, that would be, particularly if it's, a lot of businesses, of course, I think retail, but you get through the end of the fourth quarter where revenues can be pretty good. So that could be a help. I know there's some issue with, is that replacing lost revenue, but I think that fee should be able to be finessed a little bit, that this is really economic development, help out businesses. The only real big project I have is particularly good in pretty much every way, and that is a Girdwood Regional Clinic and Child Care Project. And I've been working with the clinic and the Little Bears, the only child care in Girdwood, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, and also the administration has been working on this, probably even more than I have with those groups. And if it's an immediate need and a long-term benefit, it leverages support from Alyeska Resort, which is brand new owners, and you just bought this thing, and boom, they get hit with C-19. But they're hanging in there. They made a commitment they are going to continue to develop there, actually. And they are in this supporters of this joint effort with the clinic and the child care. It's economic development. It'll help with tourism. It benefits not only Anchorage, but also, that clinic supports South past Hope. When people need care, that's what they're there. And it's also a big part of their efforts is doing tourism, when that rebounds. It's also shovel ready, so we have the employment impact. They can get ready with this very, very quickly. And what's really key here, it meets all the immediate needs. Their needs are because of COVID-19 and the larger spaces that they need to function. But it's transformative. I mean, this is so necessary. This is the only child care in Girdwood. This is the only medical in Girdwood. And, for the residents, but also all the tourists and visitors down there. This is something that we do to fix problems right now, but 20 years from now, we'll look back on this and go, this is amazing. It helped that community so much, and people who live in that, go to that community. The cost there would be, the clinic part is $5.7 million, and the child care part is $4.7 million. So it's a total of $10.4. And it's kind of viewed as a joint thing. I think the intent at this point is to share a building that really helps out tremendously, and possibly on property by Alyeska Resort. So that's all I'm going to throw at you now. A lot of what I would have put on there is already done much better by everyone else.
Thank you, John. And I believe, Pete, that you have joined us. So when you are ready, if you can hear us okay, we are hoping to hear from you on your project ideas.
I think that was 10.4, not 11.
Was it? Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Oh, all right.
education, economic development, job training. You know, we've had predictions that between 20 and 80% of our restaurants are going to be failed. And so there are many employees that have been working at those facilities that will not be getting rehired, and they may not have the skills to find another job. So that is something that I think we need to focus on. What the cost of that is, you could basically throw out any number there, and it would probably be a ballpark figure no matter who threw the number out there. I'm also agreeing with Jamie about restoring athletics, and especially after-school programs. We need to get the kids back into a normal, somewhat, or a new normal program, called whatever you want. I've been doing some coaching here this summer, as I usually do, and I have to tell you, the kids seem to be more appreciative this year that they get to play baseball, because it looked like for a long time that we weren't going to get to do that. And so it's great for their physical health going forward, but I think it's also important for their mental health in the short run. And that's what I got on my list.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
And actually, just a quick thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so for the members who aren't aware, although I think most everyone is, Pete coaches baseball, and so that's why he hasn't been in person in our last couple of meetings, and I'm sure he's been happy to be back there.
Thank you. So I think that takes us to continuing to hear from folks that are in the room. And we can start that process to my right here. So if you are ready to go, Chris.
That's fine. I was going to go to Suzanne, and if she's ready.
Oh, that's fine.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm happy to go last.
I don't care.
Okay, so my list. Toilets. People laugh, and you know it's true. There's just too many places of public defecation. There's nowhere for people to go to the bathroom. That is clearly a public health threat in the age of COVID, and we've got to deal with this. And what I would like to see is a very substantial purchase of the equipment, and then a rate review with AWWU to the RCA that gets the servicing and maintenance of these portable toilets into the actual utility, so that there is someone in some way to permanently manage it. And I understand there are threats and fears about they become places where bad things happen. Well, bad things are happening in the woods all around, but I can assure you there are dozens of places that could use a maintained toilet system, and we've got to do this. I have no idea the cost. We previously have heard about the jobs program, and Mr. Weddleton mentioned it, but I would like us to be really bold and fund either 250 or 500 homes with $10,000 worth of weatherization for homes that are less than the median home value, and for people who make at or below the median income in this town, so that we have a targeted investment in people who own homes in neighborhoods of poverty and lower to middle income, that we can actually decrease the cost of the utilities, and at the same time decrease the penalties on or the expenses and burn on our utilities themselves. So we create a benefit for the individual, a reduction in costs, better resiliency for our climate, and a stronger utility system. On to the matter that Mr. Weddleton proposed, to concur completely on the Girdwood Health Center. And I'm not sure about the child care piece, but I'm happy to have that conversation. I believe we need to do it. And he missed one beneficiary to that, and that's every time that road closes because something horrible happens on the highway, there is a place for people to get emergency medical care. We need to make sure that that exists. And so I'm strongly in support of that. Also, Mr. Dunbar mentioned Covenant House, and I do have a detailed breakdown of the expenses that they are proposing. And in particular, they have one that provides 20 almost immediate housing units that they've already secured a substantial majority of the funding that they need for that project. And of course, my emails just keep coming in, so it's going to take a second. specific, their funding requests are, there we go. I'm putting out that person. It's taking a second to load, I'll come back to it.
Can I ask you a quick clarifying question?
Yep.
So I'm sorry I missed it. So you said 250 to 500 homes, and what was this was a voucher or what was the?
No, it would be a program to be developed between AHFC and RFP to builders in the community, home builders in particular, people who have the bandwidth, but also run as a training program through the trades that would get people skilled to work in the construction trades at the same time, ideally recruited from the neighborhoods where the revitalization is happening, so that people who live in neighborhoods that are often ignored have real benefit that they accrue, both short and long term. But back to the Covenant House piece again, I'm now again having technical problems getting their file that they just sent me over. They just sent because I asked for it. But their ask is, I think it's $2.5 million total, roughly, and also the $200,000 that they've been left out that they spent for COVID changes to their program when they were asked to be part of our COVID response system, and they're having a hard time figuring out how to be reimbursed. I strongly support the investment in the Eagle River Nature Center, the Anchorage Zoo, and the Wildlife Conservation Center. These, in particular, the places where we have living animals, beings that we have stewarded in our community. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that those places stay open for the public and for the lives that have been created. I think that is everything on my list except for the big one, which is I think we should literally parcel off $40 million to do nothing with until October 1 or later, which incorporates Forrest's $20 million idea for potentially the school district, but is a real reserve because we just don't know what we don't know, and it could get worse. And I don't want us to roll through all of this and then be caught without a net. And so I think we should be pretty assertive about holding a pool of money that is substantial until the last quarter of the year, and then come back and do this again with that small portion if we don't find ourselves facing the critical crisis that could come.
And what was that dollar amount that you?
I said $40 million. My mental math, just never should be trusted folks, always use a spreadsheet and let someone else look at it, but is take whatever we've spent now, up to date, get a report from the administration, these are the expenses we've got and we anticipate that we know of. Whatever the difference is, I would cut that number in half and put it in a reserve. And so we would only spend half of what remains from now until October 1. And I'm not an inherently conservative person. However, I find myself in the case of this dynamic concerned that we are going to see that tsunami of homelessness coming and see a second wave of illness coming. And I want us to be prepared. So that's my comments. And I have the details of Covenant House, but I'm going to stop there.
Thanks. Before I turn it back to you, Shelley, I just want to note for the record we've been joined by the mayor. Welcome.
Thank you. So I think that we just continue down the road here.
You know, I can give you the timing if you want to go over.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Toilets tomorrow.
Okay, so this is a short.
Like
Got it. Okay.
Moving in the streets right now. Housing improvements would take time to ramp up, so that is both short and long term.
Okay.
I had some other ones that I mentioned. I don't see them up there.
I think you mentioned your support for the Eagle River Nature Center, Alaska Zoo, and also the Alaska Wildlife Center. And Gerber Health Clinic, so I noted that. And then also, and then the Covenant House, you also mentioned what was shared earlier about the $2.5 million for expanding the number of beds.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, the beds is only like $400,000 that they're asked. The $2.5 million is a very comprehensive transformation of their services, and positively. And I think that it would be wise to really look closely at that. And the mayor may speak to this since he's in the room, but one conversation that he had with me, and I couldn't quite wrap my mind around it, but I am supportive, is looking if we could help maintain that work. But my thought on that was a little more looking to the future of what's coming. If we know the economy is changing, which we do now, and we know the university is changing, which we do now, maybe we could help in some form of realignment and help to create work programs that will help people get educated to the university, to an emerging market force that we have up here. That's long-term and very abstract, but figuring out ways to help people get an education that actually meets the market that we're going to have here in 5 years is certainly something that's been weighing on my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Austin, I think that takes us to you.
Sure. Thanks, Shelley. A lot of these things, can you guys hear me? I can't hear myself. A lot of these things have been discussed already. So there's like a few kind of groups of things. Both the weatherization and trail work are things that Chris and I have worked with Zach Fields on, and I've asked him to talk to the administration as well. I'm particularly interested in the weatherization program, and we could, scale that to whatever amount we felt we could fund. And I think that, acknowledging the disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations, particularly poor people in our community, I think it would be great to be working on lower income homes, and we could partner with the HFC. Zach said that we could to get their records on what's already been done. So I think there's an infrastructure there. If the admin can help with that, to get that done, and it puts people to work. So for me, it has a lot of benefits. Same with the trail projects, and Zach has already identified some specific projects that Chris brought up. The Eklutna Lake Trail rehab would be about $250K. Eagle River Nature Center repairs about $200K, and then some brush removal, continued removal of brush, just $75K. So those are all things that we could kind of scale depending on what we want to do. Another thing that Zach brought to us that I think is worthwhile is looking at making municipal buildings more energy efficient. Both puts people to work and is a benefit to the medium long term. Okay, let's see what else. The assisted living home thing that Forrest brought up, I think we already talked about that. In the schools, there's a few things, the mental health, 12 clinicians that Meg and I talked about earlier, potentially funding the pre-K that was cut. I don't know how, I think it's about $1.4 million. I don't know how that ties into COVID and how the schools are working, and I think with distance learning, I just don't know. So I think there's a lot of questions about that, but I'm interested in that. And then also related to schools, I think there are a bunch of possibilities, and so it really takes us working a little bit, and maybe some of you have done this more than I have already, but with the school board and potentially Nina Bishop, and I've talked with her a bit, but maybe programs like having gap year students taking over, trying to spread kids out. Basically, it just totally depends on how what decisions they make and what happens over the next couple months. Let's see, childcare, we talked about that. Stimulus payment, Meg and I have been talking about that. Also as part of the work project, so in addition to the weatherization and the trails, Anchorage Parks Foundation has been working on a long-term plan to do an indigenous placemaking project. So I think that also it's a work project aspect because you're putting people to work. Primarily it's installing signs and other features in parks and along our trails to identify the history and Native peoples particularly related to that place. So there's putting people to work to do that work, and then long term I think it's an aspect of tourism. The other thing related to tourism is Visit Anchorage. We got their proposal for $4 million. I think we could, I mentioned earlier the downtown facilities, particularly restrooms. It kind of ties into Meg and Chris's bigger toilet thing. But that's something I think we should be considering, particularly how hard the tourism industry has been hit. And Meg brought this up as well in my list. I think we have a mutual friend, I heard her mentioning the name, who we both talked with her separately, but about she owns a small business, and what she's doing is taking the money that she got, I think through PPP, I don't actually remember, and because they have actually a lot of work. And so what she's doing with PPP is taking that money and paying her staff, if they're only, who have kids, so if they're only working half-time, she's filling that gap with that money to pay them. She's not making, she's making half-time money off of them, right? But she's paying them full-time and she's using that money. So I think that's a really creative way to support working parents, but it obviously means that you have to have the funding to do that. And so I think that's what Meg was proposing, is potentially grants to small businesses that would allow employers to do that kind of thing for childcare. So I'm interested in that as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Forrest.
Oh, actually, do you still need to go? And then,
You're like,
Yeah,
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
oh, I'm sorry. Can I go?
I think you had a clarification.
No, it's okay. Can I just, I have a late breaking one here, so can I get back in queue after Suzanne?
Sure, yeah.
I know.
All right. So, my list, I guess, to start with topic of toilets. So, Meg and I have been talking about the idea of bonding for restrooms, and particularly along trails and parks in the green belts. And the idea has evolved to maybe thinking about if it's appropriate and possible usage of this funding for some of that. And in my envisioning of it, it would be very professional looking facilities. So I don't remember if there was a dollar amount tied to that. We'd have to probably look it up. Then second is the idea of and I guess we have introduced the topic to the administration. The next is the idea of some type of, in the affordable housing realm, some type of housing trust. This is an idea that I have talked with. It's been a while since I've actually sort of dug into it, but maybe a year ago, I was having some pretty good conversations with the Rasmussen Foundation on this. And also talked sort of tangentially, sent some research to Chris Schutte on this topic as well. And so some sort of funding to get a housing trust, which, details TDB on, what exactly the trust would do, because there's a lot of different things, a lot of different types of trusts. Obviously, we want to make sure that it fills gaps that are currently existing and that it leverages funds that are currently existing. But some way to explore that and funding to get it started. I didn't have time to go back into the research that I had read a year ago, but it would be, in the millions of dollars to provide state funding for it. Then on it's probably not this next idea, not the sort of top of the list in terms of what we could do to directly impact the eviction tsunami that keeps being brought up. But funding, and this is something that I've talked with Meg about, I don't know if I've talked with anyone else about it, but funding to beef up staff at ALSC, Alaska Legal Services Corporation, so folks have adequate legal representation. Next is language access and communications for usage of funds. So that goes to the idea that Chris had brought up earlier of making sure that whatever we communicate on the ideas that are being brought up, that we have some type of portal where folks can see it, comment on it, and then making sure that there's good language access for that. Then next is an idea that I've talked with, I think maybe Austin and Meg about, which is maybe someone else can pop up if it's someone else. Beefing up staffing at property appraisal / treasury, wherever it would be, so that they can make payment plans for individuals / businesses who are having difficulty paying property taxes. Because understanding that, as Alex has stated again and again, that our current system is inflexible, that perhaps switching to some type of other system would be preferable, and that requires people. Then next is on, sorry, a lot of my things I'm not going to have dollar amounts for. Next is food, and particularly food is of interest to me in two areas: sort of future and resiliency. And particularly I want to understand. There was a lot about the food bank and at the start of this, and all of the increased need of the food bank. I want to understand in our food system what is working and what isn't working, and so the way that I would envision doing that is through some type of gap analysis, for lack of a better term. And then the second is what we can do with the funds in terms of the idea of resiliency and folks being able to be self-sustainable when it comes to food. I think that would be an interesting idea to explore for the next waves or the next pandemic. Then want to go to an idea that came out of the conversations that I've had with Unite Here, which I don't know if this is something that Visit Anchorage also talked about, but advertising for the tourism industry, and particularly Unite Here, what they talk about a lot is advertising that at some point in the future that Alaska is a place, Anchorage is a place where we're doing the right things, and we are a safe place for folks to come. Obviously, all the data and everything is changing, but that is something that Unite Here is particularly interested in. Then I'm interested in exploring the idea that Bill Pop from EDC brought up at one of our work sessions regarding some type of job market analysis to what Pete had mentioned earlier around workforce training. And someone type up if you remember the dollar amount that Bill mentioned at that work session. I don't. Then last one, I guess specific to this 156 million, is related to the idea that Meg and I have been working on pretty closely, but really Meg mostly, with the Midtown Community Council on the idea of the Midtown Partnership, and providing some type of funding to pilot a Midtown Partnership. And that would be $250,000 is the dollar amounts that Meg and I are suggesting. And then I guess if I could just put it out there, a non-COVID relief fund, that $156 million one. And you guys have heard me talk about the idea of sort of fare-free or some combination of fare-free. Have talked with Bill Falsey, Jamie, and sort of a little bit, but not much, with the mayor about the idea of using some of the funds that are coming, I think it was $18 million, to pilot some type of, for transit, to pilot some type of fare-free. So those are the ideas on the list.
Felix, I have your funding amount for the bathrooms.
Awesome.
They range $125,000 to $225,000 each, depending if we hard plumb them or if they're more like the Portland Blue standalone.
That was 100 to 250,000.
125 to 225 each.
Gotcha.
That's a discount from what they used to be. When we're done with this one, can you have me after Mr. Conway?
Sure.
Can I ask a quick question about this one?
Okay.
Not like the plumbing or anything, but, I was just wondering, so if we use CARES Act money to fund that, which I think there's an obvious connection there, how do we pay for it long-term, and have you guys been brainstorming that as well?
Yes, and depending on if it's plumbed or not, so there's the ALU route that Chris has talked about maybe with that, but then the other was to build in some operational into the budget so that they're maintained, and the idea was if we were going to bond for them to roll them out to make sure we were maintaining and keeping what we had before we ever added more. So I've got a spreadsheet, I can send it to you.
Would they basically be just operating dollars out?
Yeah.
We have to spend, okay, so there's no specific.
Yeah, and some versions are more expensive than others.
I would add though that AWWU, the wastewater utility services, the places where RVs go to dump, they're not plumbed in, they come and truck it out. And so it isn't necessarily that they're plumbed, it just would have to be built into their system. They have trucks that go and do the same thing that the private companies do when they empty them. And so the idea would be make the argument to the RCA that this is an essential function of our city's waste management system to get this waste not in our parks and instead in our sewer system. So there could be some operation OEM that we put into the bonds, but the most effective way, I believe, is make that argument to the AWWU, to the RCA that it's paid for.
So I thought I wasn't asking about plumbing, but it turns out I was.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask another little quick follow-up on that? So when you talk about the RCA and AWU, so you mentioned they have these trucks that service these private RV parks. Okay, either way though, the RVs typically pay a fee, right, to camp. Or they pay to, if it's a private party, obviously they pay there. You keep shaking your head no, but like, so if that's not the case, then what is paying for these trucks?
So if you, in your district, at the Turpin exit,
Yep.
there's that pull-off there where you can drain. That is not paid, and it's the AWW system that manages that whole thing.
I understand AWU manages it, but SWS, I mean, that's primarily used for leachate, however you pronounce it. And those are SWS trucks being paid for by SWS rates. I guess what I'm getting at is, when you talk about going to the RCA, are you saying, because it would be obviously public infrastructure or public toilet, like a very small penny a bill or whatever on everybody's bill who has water and sewer? Okay, I think that's totally fair. I was just wanted to make sure that's what you're saying.
Thanks.
And it definitely takes care of the problem.
And yeah, so I think what we're going to be doing after we're done is probably going through all of these proposals again and maybe doing a little bit more fine-tuning of things. So Pete, do you mind if we wait for your question on the restroom issue until we get to the fine-tuning of proposals?
Sure, that's fine.
Awesome. So then I guess we have Suzanne, and then I have Forrest, Chris, and Cameron who have some new ideas to bring to the table.
Okay, is this good? Can you hear?
Quiet.
Quiet? Better? Okay, so John talked about the Girdwood Community Clinic and Child Care Center, which as he noted is shovel-ready, and that's top of my list as well, as is keeping people housed and working. And so the rental and mortgage assistance and how much needs to be set aside, I don't know, I don't have that information. I know, Chris, you mentioned, leaving enough money for some of these so it can carry us through some of these anticipated difficult points that we expect to come. And so I'll just say I don't have a sense of the run rate on some of these allocations, and maybe that's something you all covered in the first hour. Apologies for missing that part. But how much to set aside in terms of rental and mortgage assistance, and as well as identifying the gaps. Like, I will confess to some confusion concerning preschool child care funding. I know we've received some emails where there were some folks who said they were left out of the initial monies for child care because of the nature of their establishments. And so I don't know if that's something that Cameron, what you had suggested, picks up or covers some of that gap. So I'm not
going to provide a whole lot of details to fill out the framework right now. A lot of things I support have been spoken to, but if there is a gap in that piece, I think that's something that needs to be addressed. One specific program that actually has come from a constituent and we've been talking about has to do with innovation and entrepreneurship. And it would be along the lines of support for health technology innovations, efforts, for current businesses to explore and design and transform their operations, and for new businesses to respond to the changing needs and opportunities. And this would be in conjunction through UAA Manufacturing, the UAA Manufacturing Incentive Program. Details are not fleshed out on that yet. I know that there was a suggestion of setting aside 5% of all of the COVID-19 relief monies that are spent towards innovation and entrepreneurship, and then also, business support. Going back to the point about keeping people housed, I think the farther upstream that can be done in terms of the economy, obviously the better that is. And so I don't know how much, or if there's been mentioned any kind of grant program yet for business support in terms of adapting their practices and operations so that, we can, in the event, and I hope this doesn't happen, that there's any kind of hunkering down or shutdown, more businesses will be equipped to stay open and have been able to pivot to a more electronic-based system or whatever. Okay, so I'd also say, and I don't have a number for this either, but any improvements we can make to online platforms and technology for public participation to, maximize getting information online, I think is appropriate. And I don't know what, I know that the COVID-19 site has a lot of, you all in the administration have, you've got a dashboard, you've got a lot of tools there, and I think some of those, from what I'm hearing from constituents, it would be helpful if some of those could be expanded to facilitate more of the public engagement during this period where we need to have social distancing or physical distancing. And here's one that Chris, Judy, and I have just started to talk about, and it may be expanding the South Anchorage Farmers Market. This would fall in the areas of food security and also economic development. That's one area where, and I know some parts of town, the markets may not be, I don't know if they're being as successful, but I know that that's one area of growth, and actually there would be more vendors who would be involved if there was more room for it. And I think vouchers, we get the suggestion from the ERTF for food, gas, and prescriptions. I'd like to see vouchers for food from the local farmers markets as well. Don't have an amount on that either. And then we've received a number of emails asking for specific grants from different organizations. And I'm not totally clear on the contingency funds or the muni funds, but it seems like we definitely need to keep money available as those requests for grants come in so that they can be considered. And then I just would mention two other points. For specific staffing needs with the administration, I assume those will be addressed later, for example, like an epidemiologist and other resources like our health department needs now in order to better respond and prepare for any subsequent waves of the virus. So I'm not sure, Felix, if that's something that we add to our list or gets addressed later, but I wanted to mention it. And then I was trying to pull up the Visit Anchorage proposal, and that was one area I had on my list in terms of how to support that industry because of the long-term effects. And so that's something I would definitely like to look at in greater detail. So thank you.
Awesome, thanks. So actually, I'm wondering if, before we go back to Forrest, Chris, and Cameron, if we could hear from the administration, and then I will go back to you three.
Certainly, and maybe before we get into our list, I know there have been a couple of questions that have been raised about a couple of programs that maybe I can just really quickly give kind of an update on. So on the first, on the rental assistance program, generally that, just so everyone remembers, we've appropriated $3 million to this program up until this point. So through the end of last week, there were 1,283 referrals made to the MOA rental relief program. 495 households with 1,341 people within those households have received rental assistance. The total amount of funds expended, as I said, as the end of last week, is $458,700. There are 256 appointments scheduled through July 25th. And the remainder, there are still some that are outstanding, but they're somewhere in that process of either setting up the appointment, the request has been made for some additional documentation, or we're potentially already deemed ineligible. And then just kind of two data points that we've been collecting. Those that have already been served, so the 495 households, 14% had somebody that had been furloughed, 14% had a job end, 38% had been laid off, and 35% had had their hours reduced. And 31% of the folks that we have also have had some amount of rental arrearage. So going back, they have more than 1 month that they are behind on, only 31%. So, and just as a reminder, we, with our program, are allowing for up to 2 months at this point in time in terms of rental assistance. So that's that one. And then just really quickly, the other one that has been mentioned, I think, by a couple of members is the emails that I think everyone has received regarding the very tiny amount of child care providers that are not licensed. And I don't know quite all the details. Nicole Levo has been working on that. But we spent some time with Kate Vogel in the legal department, and we actually, based on what has passed, we don't believe with the child care funding that we have already gotten passed that we can actually help those providers based on the language that has been passed. So that is on our list. We are going to put something together. I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $450,000 to put on our list to potentially come forward to try to help those facilities as well. So that's just the two quick ones. I will just say, and Chris can jump in when I get done if he has anything to add, but I will say that I think a lot of the things that have been talked about, we're talking about. So to the extent that we have done additional work on some of those, we will certainly be reaching out to the individual members that have said they're working on that. But just to run through a couple or emphasize where we are, I believe Meg mentioned this one, but we're extremely interested in the Volunteers of America and ASD and mental health clinicians. It's obviously something that will be back in front of the body on the 28th for consideration. We're definitely interested in that. We are also working with ASD regarding their trying to figure out their deficit on their pre-K side. I believe that number was about $1.6 million. So we're talking with them and working with them on that. As Suzanne mentioned, there are a number of AHD positions that we are wanting to expand and fill. So there will be some amount that we will likely also spent quite a bit of time with the Girdwood Alliance and others regarding the Girdwood project, so we certainly support that one as well, and we'll be working on trying to figure out how we can finalize that. Another one is we've been also working very closely with Visit Anchorage and others regarding their $4 million request and what that ultimately looks like and how we can better serve and help the tourism industry. We believe we have a couple of different ways that we can do that. I think there's some ability and flexibility within the small business grants that we have received to potentially help some of those businesses, as well as looking at this proposal. And then the final one that I know a couple of members have talked about, we've also done quite a bit of work on, is in regards to the weatherization program, and both with HFC and Rural Cap. So those are a couple of the broader ones. I know there's some smaller items, some additional jobs, and parks work and things like that we're also working through, but generally speaking, those are some of the bigger items. So Chris, I don't know if I missed anything that you might want to throw in on top of that, but I'll leave it to you.
No, thank you. You covered it pretty well. Thanks.
So that was our admin staff. So Felix, I know that you had the queue there for assembly members that had additional ideas that they'd like to share.
Yep, so I have Forrest, Chris, and Cameron in that order.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned before, I was trying to get the folks that I was working with to send emails to the assembly. You'll see that you got another email from that Iditarod folks that much more specifically lays out what they need that money for. The other one that I've been speaking with her for a while is Emily Edenshaw is the head of the Heritage, Alaska Native Heritage Center. And they do cultural tourism. They're really the only entity that does that type of cultural tourism in the city. They were not included in Visit Anchorage's proposal. I tried to close that gap between the two organizations, and they just, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to work it out. She had sent you a request. She first sent it to me, and then I asked her to send it to the full body. It's in your email right now. $250,000 grant to the. Are you not getting these? Chris is shaking his head. It's from Valerie Clark. It's her assistant. And it's $250,000 to the Heritage Center to help them respond. They have had a very challenging year, as you can imagine. They are part of the visitor industry, but they're often sort of kept apart to a certain degree. They're not downtown. They're often way deep East Anchorage, and they serve a little bit different clientele sometimes, but they've had some real challenges. So there's a letter attached to that that lays it out better than I am, but it's $250,000 to the Native Heritage Center. Thank you.
Next in your queue there. Oh, yeah,
Felix?
Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that number is small for their needs. They're being humble in their ask, and I strongly support us looking at them as these organizations that are infrastructure in our community that are essential. And to that end, I forgot to mention one that was on my list, and that's the Mulcahy Stadium is actually in the process of being reconstructed. And they mostly don't need money, they need some labor support, and I would like to make sure that they fall into that list. Their project has been ongoing for a number of years. But the one that was, I didn't get to mention, and I briefly talked with the administration about this, one thing I'd like us to do, and do this in the next month, is prepare a grant program for teachers that would fund $500 each classroom of PPE, personal protective equipment. And I know we would think that the school district should be providing this, but I have heard from some of my teacher friends that they're not being supported in a manner that they need to be supported. And so what I would like, and it doesn't have to be a cash gift, but some kind of a bank of personal protective equipment that teachers themselves can access directly for their classrooms. Because there, I believe, is a gap between what we're hearing and what's actually happening.
Can I just to get a scope on that? Are you talking about for every classroom in the district, or would you put some kind of like Title I or other parameters on that?
I would suggest 2,700 teachers, I think, is right for classrooms is the number that I got. And I would look to just all those classrooms. I don't know. They wouldn't personal protective equipment in these classrooms where students are likely to come pouring in and the teachers are feeling threatened. I would like to have a program that goes directly to the classroom and not to the administration to be distributed. So they could come to us and say, here we are, we need this help. We would be able to help them.
I would like to make a comment in regards to Title I. I don't think that the virus would discriminate against lower or upper income. These are kids, these are teachers. I don't think it matters what school they're in. And there is a thing going around on social media about getting protective face masks where teachers and children can communicate, but they're not actually masks that cover their faces per se. They go over the head. A lot of hearing impaired people wear them, and they're a little bit more expensive. They ran the number on, and it came to about $650,000 for ASD white. They're about $49 each, but they're reusable and they're cleanable, so they can wipe them and clean them. So it's just something for the younger kids too, as they can communicate with their teachers, not get nervous or scared. And when you have the younger kids, they can see their teachers' faces, their expressions, their smiles. It's a really great idea, and I can forward that to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. And to me, I don't have a specific, this is what you should buy. I think as much as possible, we should empower each of these classroom teachers to have a mechanism to get what they need, whether the district can provide it or not. And I think that's a responsibility we have.
Awesome. Cameron?
And really quick, Cameron, before you go, Chris, I just wanted to confirm, so for the Mulcahy Stadium effort, what were you proposing?
I know that the administration has been working with the individuals who have been working on that project, so I don't, in front of me, I haven't reached out to them, it's been a month. So I'm not sure what the cash needs are. I believe it's more of a labor need. It's one of these job projects that could be made feasible. So I believe that non-specific at this time. But if we're talking the nature center and these various other projects, the Mulcahy Stadium is one that has been asking for some opportunities, and we could probably finish a job there by putting people to work, training laborers, et cetera. Again, that work program cost.
Thank you.
Oh, so this is Cameron, for those online. I'm thinking through a couple of things. One is I appreciate Forrest bringing forth the Alaskan Heritage Center, and I think that I'm thinking process in terms of, so just as a reference, when the organization that I run was trying to work on giving out CARES Act funding, there's this process of, do you wait for people to ask you? And is that how you prioritize it? Is that how you decide on it? Or do you create your categories and create your things and then go out and find those that need it? And it's likely a combination of both. And so I just want to be thoughtful about those that are aware that we have these funds and that there's an opportunity to be able to receive funding to do the relief kinds of things that they need. But there are lots that may not be aware of it, right? And so it's not necessarily completely thoughtful to only be talking about the ones that are giving us proposals, I guess, is the piece that I want to make sure that we're thinking through in terms of our process. And that that's why starting with these large outcome areas, starting with sort of the strategic thinking about how we divide up the funding, and then going and thinking about where to infuse that. And I want to encourage organizations to reach out to us and say, hey, will you fund us? Will you help us? We want that. But I also want us to be thoughtful about looking at it from both sides. And with that, I think about the leveraging. So I think about the arts and culture organizations that are, and the sort of arts and culture community in general, and the need there in terms of organizations and people and that sort of thing. So that's a category that I think we need to be thinking about, and I think we need to be thoughtful about the fact that one of the issues is that many of them don't have an infrastructure behind them. And so there's a thriving arts community there that doesn't necessarily have an organization associated with them. And so just being thoughtful about not letting that work and that
closer to breaking this down, one of the things that I really love to see, and Forrest and I were just talking about this during the break, is I'd love to see us try to reduce, in some ways, consolidate some of the buckets so that there are 4 or 5, 6 major sort of areas that we're looking at funding, and then looking at just demonstrating like a percentage. Like we're looking at really putting 20% of the funding in this area and 10% of the funding in this area as a way of communicating out, in a very simple way, the intentions behind the funds. Now below that is a lot of the projects and a lot of the areas and these kinds of things. But Jason and I actually were just having this conversation, I think yesterday, about other cities and how they potentially are saying, here's generally how we're going to spend the money. We're going to do it in these general areas. And I think that's something that I'd like to try to see us get to in this work, because communicating out this to the broader public is going to be very challenging, especially if there's a list of 100 different projects, as opposed to here's the sort of strategic intent behind the money. We're going to hold this much aside because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We're going to tackle these short-term, immediate things in these 3 or 4 areas, and then we're going to look at these longer-term areas, and here generally are those categories. So I just think that would be really helpful as one result from this work. So that's what I had to share. Thank you.
Thanks. So I have 3 folks in the queue, and then I'm going to turn it back to Shelley, since I think we're about done with maybe the sort of first initial list to guide us through the next process, the finesse. So I have Austin, Chris, and then Meg.
I was just going to bring up or raise a question, I guess, about how we measure success with the money that comes out of these programs, and do we do that? What happens if they're not successful? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's something we should consider, particularly if we're giving big chunks of money.
Can I briefly respond to that, or not respond to it?
I'll go to Chris.
Thank you. And I think the answer to that is on our list of guiding principles. We would add a category of what's the word? Outcomes, quality assurance.
Performance measures.
Yeah, performance measures. We would add that under our guiding principles because I think that's a very important piece. And I just wanted to respond to what you said, Cameron. I completely agree that we have a duty to put out to the public. These are the areas we're thinking, and please tell us what you think are important priorities. And that's the survey tool. And I think you just helped me frame how that should look. And that is when we're done with this conversation and we've come up with basic frameworks, categories, and we have our priorities, we can even list those as examples. We then put out to the public in those categories, those frames, and say, in these areas, what do you think is a priority for you? It doesn't have to be our bullets. You add yours here. That will help us get a long way. And one project I didn't mention is super interesting. Have you all met with the Concert Association and the PAC at all? Have you heard their concept? It's really fabulous. They're out of work. And all their artists are out of work. And all their fabricators are out of work. And all of their IATSE members that do the rigging are out of work. And they are investigating bringing up a production show, a being developed Broadway show that would come up here and essentially go from script to ready to go and tour the United States of America and built in our PAC and worked on by our crews that do fabricating, by our seamstresses and tailors, by our IATSE crews to make up an entire, Hamilton 2.0 or whatever it might be, which would be a jobs program for our local community, and it would create something enduring. So I'm not suggesting to put that on the list. I'm just saying there are some amazingly creative ideas out there, and Cameron's point, but we should be making sure that the opportunities are open to those people who have ideas before we make decisions. It's very important.
Thanks. So I have, it keeps going, but I will want to cut it off. Meg, Forrest, and Pete.
Thanks, Felix. This is for Jason. Cameron's point about who hasn't asked. So there were 3 areas in the admin I wanted to ask if had asks. The rec centers, the library, and did we need to do anything around the resiliency of our EOC? Particularly, should we need to have large operations again and balancing that with the needs of the library? So, it doesn't need to be now, but those were 3 areas we haven't really talked about that feel like probably have been COVID impacted in different ways. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is that Chris?
Yeah, sorry, you looked like you were about to talk. So through the chair, some of the members also, yes. The short answer to your question is that every department has definitely a current COVID impact and some needs and a post-COVID needs, and you highlighted a few of them. Those are part of the administration packages, so thank you.
Thanks. Forrest?
Thank you. So regarding what Chris has said, and I think it's a little different what Cameron had said, but if we do develop a tool that is web-based, where people are giving us their feedback, I think that's positive when we want to do that. However, I just wanted a couple notes of caution on that. One, I want it to be comment-based rather than kind of poll-based, because online polls are far too easy to game. And that's related to a second point, which is think about who is more likely to respond in comments and certainly in polling. So I have tried to mention a few times today about service workers in the visitor industry. And that is particularly a group that has been particularly harmed by this event. They are not, don't want to paint with a broad brush here, but they are less likely to be able to go online and make a detailed comment than some of our other more sophisticated folks. And so again, it's great to get substantive comments. We're going to try to get feedback like we always do. But we have to acknowledge, like our community council system, they tend to be populated by certain populations, not others. And we have to always keep that in mind.
Thanks. Pete?
Thank you, Felix, and I just wanted to, I got a couple of things to follow up on what Chris said about work on Mulcahy Stadium. If they're looking for labor, they might, and they may have already done this, check with apprenticeship programs. They might be able to get some people to do some work down there that need to get some hours in to keep moving forward on their apprenticeship. And also, I was wondering, we have the Parks Department that is involved in doing some homeless type services and has homeless expenses, and I'm wondering if that might be able to be qualified to be reimbursed by CARES Act money, and that might free up money in their budget to build some public restrooms near some of the park facilities. Just wondering if anybody thought about that. Thank you.
Thanks. So I guess I'll turn it back over to Shelley.
Okay, and just wanted to make one more call, just in case folks didn't have the opportunity to share their project ideas or proposals.
May I ask one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
One issue that has come up is neighborhood impacts to the high use of Chugach State Park. And I know that we're limited given the service area boundary of the park and the MOA, but that's something that I would like to put on the list for perhaps either working with the state or I don't know. It's in the early stages, but I think it's something that's worth considering. Thanks.
Shelley, I think I gave you, I actually had a different number in regards to the senior centers.
Yeah.
I wrote 2.5, it's actually 2.4 million for the senior centers within the community.
Okay, I just made that correction.
Okay, thank you, Shelley.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so this is good timing because we had a designated break at 2:30, so I think we need that time right now so that I can consider this package and think about our immediate next steps. So what has started to happen, and as a prep towards that end, I'll share my screen again, towards some of the comments that we're getting about how do we package this and consider this and certainly share this with the public. So what I've done, at least preliminarily, in about 4 pages of just solid project ideas, is to start to categorize those in terms of if you've identified them as short-term potential investments. Right now, I have this packaged in kind of one section, short and or long. Some folks had mentioned that they have both potential impacts, long-term investment, and then many others that don't currently have timing associated with them, although some of them have dollar amounts. I've also collapsed them so that you can see what folks have estimated as potential dollar amounts, and then where it's popping out, what those outcome areas might look like. So you can see the combination of things up here right now. So child care as an example, employment as an example, equity, homelessness, housing, health, etc. So we are going to take a break, and I'm going to think through the process of what our next step is, which I think means that it would be very helpful for folks to have this full list in front of them and to consider that as we work as a team to think about the next potential and most productive steps. So I'm going to work at packaging these and getting these printed off, and we'll reconvene at 2:45. So we have just a little bit more than 15 minutes for our break. Any questions that you have for me before we take that break? Yeah.
Actually, a question to the administration, but as we consider this and we really dig into these, Chris Schuette's comment on me raising the other 3 areas makes me think there's an administration proposal coming, and I'm going to have a hard time slotting all of these in my brain without having maybe just even a ballpark amount, because we're talking about reserves and other things. So I just kind of want to, that's a big red flag for me right now. So you can think about that over the break maybe.
Got it. So it looks like sorry, I'm getting feedback from someone who may be not on mute. But okay, so we'll go ahead and take the break. Hopefully the administration will be able to come back with some stuff. I guess give it to Shelley directly, whatever you may have. And then, see everyone in 15 minutes. Just a quick update on the Facebook Live. We've gotten quite a lot of good suggestions from Mr. Oliva, but no questions. So if you want to look at all of those suggestions from Mr. Oliva, feel free to.
Some of them are actually pretty good.
Okay, so go to some stairs. Suzanne, how are you doing? Can I grab it for you? Of course. Can you share with me again? they say you're with your parents in your class. Because that way, whenever you're ready, you can jump out. Makes sense because that teacher in that grade is almost anyway, so it's a same curriculum. This group is I think it's going to be so for like it was at the end of the year. It was like here are your assignments, and then we also need to be doing food. We also need to be doing every 2 weeks to make sure but then there was always like activities. Yes.
Do you guys have a way to print it?
We don't. The admin focus. So if you go here to the left, they've got bigger.
No, I think it's fine. I mean, ideally, you want to line it up in some way.
Yeah, she's always sharing it.
Things are all child care. I mean, it's some
Yeah,
way.
I've done a little bit of that right now, so when I'm on child care, staff, and then we've got employment, yeah, but it's just, it's from our end, it's not been
No, I think it's
right now.
I'm in charge of the rest of the time. I mean, so that's the thing. Those are our priority areas.
We go back to the outcome. Well, maybe if you present, is there anything that's not been addressed?
You need to circle back to the framework, right?
Yep,
Say, let's-
yep,
Let's talk about the buckets, let's talk about the
these are all fine. No, I'm just gonna walk over. Thank you. I am just gonna walk over.
Has been approved is 23 million for the capital
Where did you get to work? Did you work for it? Yeah. Well,
Do you know, we take a little bit, or is there a discount on local prep?
Yeah, my daughter's sketch, I can look at her, load it, she's good. The rest of the week,
Oh, yeah, I forwarded the wrong one.
that's how I do it. I go along with it. But I got it's fine. Got this salary, got that salary, so much good. Okay. I mean, I'd like that to change, but I mean, not, to be honest, that's how it is.
Okay.
What's that?
My poor dog. Today is like the first day nobody's been home.
That's true, right? Your cat. Oh, right.
She went to a friend. She went to a friend of hers. Awesome. And I saw her running down the street.
Hey folks, so while we're waiting, I think Shelley's coming back with the printouts. I just wanted to just do a quick FYI to the members. You're going to be getting an invite, hopefully soon, to a couple of meetings that I have been working with the First Alaskans Institute to facilitate over the last week or so. They asked me last week, or maybe it was actually on Monday, I don't even know, to help facilitate a couple of meetings in addition to what's already been talked about around the alcohol tax. And specifically, First Alaskans Institute was interested in organizing government-to-government meetings between the tribal organizations and the Anchorage Assembly around the alcohol tax. And so you're going to be getting invites to those meetings, and apologies if you can't attend, but those meetings are going to be scheduled on Wednesday. There are two different meetings. It's going to be the same content, but First Alaskans thought it might be good to schedule two different meetings just in case folks can't make one or the other. So you'll be getting that information very soon.
Yes, that must be the next, so then going forward. Yeah, I assume that's what it's really like. This is on the screw, and those things, and then we ask like, who fixed that first group? So they must be just trying to fix that first group. I think, but we'll see. what it says.
Probably a comedy.
Hey Jason, do you want to email that childcare leader back, or do you want me to?
Who what?
That childcare lady who asked about the Sam's place.
Oh, I can.
You, okay. I could too, I could probably fumble my way through explaining it, but it sounds like, well, maybe Nicole already told her.
So just a quick time check. I got a text from Shelley. So is that 2:46? So she said maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So any minute now she'll be back.
She went to go pick stuff at her office, which their office is really close.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You can see it out the window. It's right
That's how.
Amphetamines.
Very little sleep.
Well, you don't get any sleep with kids that young to begin with.
Yeah, so maybe you're just like, you're rolling it. You're like, yeah, everyone, now you feel my pain.
Yeah. I do the 15 minutes here and there whenever my office, if I have
Yeah.
10 minutes between meetings, I'll close my eyes for 10 minutes.
Totally.
Quickly recharge the battery.
Yeah, I guess once you're a parent of a young kid, you have to learn to nap, right? I'm a terrible napper. I can't relax.
You'll learn.
Yeah. Or you just kind of go without the sleep, too. You know,
Yeah.
you just kind of are in that revved up, I don't know, state for
Yeah.
a few years. And then one night they sleep through. And you wake up and you don't know what happened.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, this is much better.
You're looking forward to that day, Jason?
And then as they get older, they keep you up for other reasons.
Texting you over 7 minutes.
Claire prides himself on knowing all your names.
Oh yeah, Claire is like an honorary assembly member. Actually, it's about time we appointed her as the youth representative. A little bit of, not narcissism.
Nepotism.
Yeah, nepotism.
It could be both.
You guys are, you'd be like the Begaches. Just be everywhere.
There's even some bad ones.
She's way more liberal than me.
Yeah, I know.
Can you imagine having to be her shuttle, so you have to get to assembly meetings and get her to the assembly meetings, and oh god, your life.
Drive her to the assembly meetings and then drive her to the protest of the assembly meetings.
Oh, this job is interesting. Is that thunder? Was that thunder? You hear that? Was that thunder? Oh.
Food cart. Close.
Close.
Yeah, sometimes do you guys struggle with like describing this job? Like I don't want to say, oh, it's so overwhelming or you're always working because those sound so negative. Yeah, and you say that a lot. It's like I've never done anything like this, and I like work in like a corporate law firm, and I just feel like it's nuts. It's like you can't finish anything.
All consuming.
Yeah, it's all consuming. It's just like you're not constantly engaged, you miss everything.
And you never go to parties anymore because it's like going to work.
What kind of party? I know.
Everybody always wants to talk about work. I'm like, jeez.
Yeah, no, that is true. I've had some awkward like things where I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. And people are like,
Yeah.
That's true.
Back when I used to go to Myrna's, that would happen. I'd be like, guys, I'm not here to talk about this.
But you can't even stop it though. It's like
I know.
everybody.
Well, whenever Callie and I used to like go to things like 4th of July, for example, we went down and her parents' friends are all much more conservative, older Republican folks mostly. And they would just start, one of the older guys would just start going, and I would just be like, please, can you just, can you just sit here and drink beer? Like, not right now, like just not right now. You know?
You realize we're like having this weird form of group therapy right now.
Socially distanced therapy. This is
My
how it works now.
clinical background tells me we're doing something very important.
So a silver lining has been, I told my daughter I was leaving today, and I was here this afternoon, and she actually was like, oh, disappointed. After many times of being cooped out, some of this distance has made her a little hard to ponder. I'm like, no, okay.
I thought you were gonna say that she was like, what? You won't leave at midnight?
No, it's so surreal though, like when school was in session, I don't know, if Suzanne's experiences with Cameron, but you drop your kid off and you're like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it's like such a jarring thing to me. It's like, oh yeah. Cause we have like a special meeting over there at 5, like I'm not
Well, it can be days, actually, because I'm getting up before them, going to work,
over the weekend about this. I'm like, Felix.
If I had my way, we'd be having a continued public hearing on Saturday from noon until whenever it ended.
And aren't you guys glad that I shut that down?
That's what we'd be doing.
We're a different all-day meeting tomorrow, so,
We had a couple of, they weren't public hearings, they were town halls, I don't know if these used for,
It was SB 91.
Yeah, SB 91, yeah.
That's
That
right.
was on Saturday.
I thought there was another one, so maybe it was taxi cabs my first year or something like that.
No, for the AO to protect LGBT from non-discrimination back in 2009,
Yeah.
there was a hearing all day on Saturday,
Yeah.
hearing, and people lined up out the door, and there was like DJs and music, and Prego was serving hot dogs to his people outside while his people were, he wouldn't actually do the work, and my niece was like, wait, you're serving hot dogs, you are the servant, you served me a hot dog, and she hounded him until he did. It was very satisfying.
Is that Heather? Is
Yeah,
that
when she was much younger, she was, wait, you're supposed to be the servant here, you do your job. It was beautiful.
Sounds like a constant.
It's definitely related.
Is she one of your sisters?
Yeah, my sister Rebecca lives here as well, her daughter.
Cool.
Oh, I met your sister when I was campaigning.
Yeah.
Stuff in their house.
Yeah.
But John may live on, they live somewhere else.
No, my other sister's in Seattle, but my sister Rebecca.
Oh, your sister, not Heather. Okay.
Yeah, no, they live in, the Rocky Creek.
Yeah, Heather lived.
Oh, yeah. So is this all on the Facebook Live?
Not yet.
We're totally off?
Yeah, I think it.
Is it?
I mean, some might ask where I draw my line in
Okay.
here, but. Thought I'd ask.
Parks and Rec episode.
What'd you say?
Parks and Rec episode.
Yeah, I know. I never watched that show until the pandemic. We bought a treadmill, and I just be like on the treadmill watching it, and laughing.
It really resonates.
Really, it really does. The ridiculousness.
All the boxes roll off.
Oh. And he's like, backing the back up, and he looks right at me, he's like,
Well, so carry on with these emails.
So I don't know if y'all can hear me, but we have not started again yet. So we will let you know as soon as we begin. We're just waiting for the facilitator to come back, Shelley, with the printouts.
These day-long sessions always go like this, I feel like.
She is on her way up the elevator.
Awesome, that's great.
You know, if you do all the brainstorming, and for me, then I like kind of crash in the afternoon, and that's when the most important time is.
Heck, this is how I
I know,
solve
but
the
then I
problem.
won't go to sleep. I
All
agree.
hail.
Did you ask permission?
Yes.
I like it.
I don't either, but I still like it too. Permission, more coffee? And the gesture, it's me and Statue of Liberty right now. You're me retired, you're part of the total masses. I'm
Been a week,
serving
guys.
coffee. This is the first week I've spent with people. Like, we've spent a week with each
Yeah,
other.
I spent more.
Oh, yeah, that's what
More.
It's like being back at work.
That's why you're so tired. You have to hang out with us all week.
It's honestly why you're so
It is exhausting.
I wasn't thinking so much that, Felix. This is a very nice setting.
Felix is getting giddy, it's happening.
It's the weekend.
So Felix, I emailed you a copy of this
Okay.
for sharing with folks that are on the line.
Felix, can
Yeah,
you do
got it.
that?
Thanks.
Good. Felix, would you slap a big fat draft watermark on it?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jennifer, I'm sending it your way.
I would say something. It's not an outlier.
Oh,
I'm the face.
I feel nice.
Since Tuesday, that's an outlier.
I think it's Thursday afternoon, not till
So this, for everybody, Covenant House has sent us all a very brief one-page description of their framework.
Cool.
Not including the 200,000.
All right, so I guess since we're getting situated, if we can turn the Zoom and the Facebook Live back on.
This is pretty great how we all have our own copy process. Whoever's idea.
Oh, yeah. So I don't think you heard me talk about it. It was David's idea, yeah. So yesterday, Visit Anchorage did a luncheon here. It was like 8 people. And basically what they did is they had each individual table. So it sort of looked like a classroom where they had tables, space, tables, space, tables. And each table had one person and one and one and one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Chris, that email that Frank Brass sent, really nice.
Yeah.
Do you know Frank?
I don't know.
He's, Judy knows him. I'm a good friend, yeah. Yeah, he's really very good. He's very outspoken at the same time.
Gotcha.
And he's,
Hey, Ira.
hi Ira, welcome.
Thank you.
He's,
Sergeant at arms.
it's like he is.
Good. No one.
He kind of has his school office.
I wrote him back. I said, thank you.
I saw that.
I'll
It
give it
was
a
very sweet.
Yeah.
And he's a guy, he lives on
Felix, did you get a chance to share that with folks?
Yes, I did send it to Jennifer.
Thank you very much.
I remember.
I'm doing a watermark
I
on it,
remember.
and then
Got it.
keep it out.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then when you send it out, I assume you'll send it to admin folks or at least Jason.
Yeah, I just want to send it to the full assembly too.
Yeah, sure. Let's go. Yeah, so we all have it in our email.
Yep. If the Word version gives you, the uncollapsed version of all these categories,
Okay.
and it's like, yeah,
I just want to keep in mind, same thing that
He's terrible. He's terrible.
I'll just put draft in the.
yeah, and the better, yeah, I actually know how to do it on PDF, but I can't quickly find that in my brain.
Merge? I've heard that term, but I thought it was for like, when you send out newsletters, merging for email, so like when I, or like when we have a big like single item thing, it'll send a response all at
So,
once.
basically said,
Do you hear that, Judy?
Yes, I actually was talking to Kenzie about it because I
Actually, I just found it.
Kenzie has a really similar workload. And so she was like, even as for me,
Jennifer, I figured out how to do the graph.
You were like, huh?
PDF.
I was like, excuse me, can you talk to me more?
Good.
So, yes, she's gonna show me how to work it.
Nice. We should facilitate that. Session, so they can share all their tips and tricks. Yeah, that's a good idea. It'd be great for us to get all the things they're doing, because they're probably gonna. Well, Felix meets with Judy weekly.
No, I don't need.
Oh, or talk.
Talk, yeah.
We can definitely a goal that we
Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're about to find project lists. Wow, I think maybe we're a little more cash, I could meet more if you want more.
I was just thinking how much I missed Dexter the other day, and then I saw Steph post a photo of getting
Oh my gosh. He is the dumbest and sweetest dog.
I was really glad to see them and Nancy get together, versus we keep her long term. Yeah, we have her for at least 3 more weeks, but she has, like, it's been pretty eager to play hide and seek with them and stuff. Cause she also gets to have her not paying her every session for her every day, every session of the day like that. Just dramatically swap her around.
Yeah, that's.
Just to clarify, the Facebook Live, is that the same video or is it a new one?
It's still the same one. From this afternoon, the one before lunch was separate.
Got it. Thank you.
I just sent it. Yep.
We'll just give another few minutes, so Jennifer can send that out to everyone, and then we will get going.
Maybe Shelley, you should send it to Cameron too, if you have his email address. In case you have a problem with mine.
Okay.
Oh, got it, Shelley, never mind.
Okay, awesome.
So I don't know who's on Zoom, but if you could mute yourself, we're getting a little feedback.
Wow. Really sounds different.
Right.
Felix, I'm ready whenever you guys are.
Okay.
All right, yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And for admin and other folks on the Zoom, you will, if not yet, you will soon receive an email with this document. So I will turn it over to Shelley.
Thank you. So I'm making my way back to the microphone. So what I have just shared with folks and what folks either received in an email or have in front of them, and I am about to share with our friends on Zoom so that everybody is, can you allow me to share your screen? Share my screen? And maybe while that's happening, just a quick little breath. So we've got, we said that we were going to go a little bit longer than the 4:30 time frame, and so closer to 5 today. And so what we have in front of us in these next couple of hours, we have an opportunity to review this full package of potential project ideas and to think specifically about the next steps. So how do we take that big list and take it to the next level, if that's in more focused conversations and action planning and fleshing out some of those ideas into more concrete details. There's an opportunity to do that, potentially not today, but certainly a process that everyone would agree to move things forward as a next step. So what I have shared with you is the potential project list, but right before we do that, I just wanted to remind ourselves, so we have an opportunity to review that list, but within the context and the backdrop of this draft framework that we had all developed and reviewed together earlier, recognizing that certainly there might be improvements with this draft, and we've already identified some of those in our earlier process. So this is not, for some reason, wanting me to share my screen right now. There we go. Okay, so what folks should see both in the room here and then on Zoom is a copy of the framework that we reviewed and discussed earlier today. And so our job right now is to consider this preliminary or draft set of project ideas and start to think about whether or not we are actually covering the outcome areas that are important to us, and if we have enough or the beginnings of the right mix of projects that are both in the short and potentially the long-term categories or the buckets. And then also, is there an opportunity to think, at least preliminarily, about some of the guiding principles? So as some of those project ideas have come forward, are they starting to hit on some of those key points related to the most vulnerable populations and alignment with other efforts and collaboration and access to resources? And so I wanted to start by first introducing how I packaged these So each of you, as you were sharing earlier, provided a brief description of your project, and so to the best of my ability, I've tried to capture that here on this handout and also what folks have received in email. And then, in addition to those project ideas, also gave us a sense of what the project dollar amount is. And then last, in this, again, brief overview, is a sense of the timing. So did folks identify it as a short or a shorter long-term or kind of a combination of those things? So the question before us right now, and you can see that I've categorized at least preliminarily, we've got a number of projects, and the most number of projects that fall into that short category currently. Some, a little bit shorter list that fall into like, maybe this is a short, but also has a long-term impact or long-term investment category. And then one project that was looking to be like potentially a medium or identified as medium to long-term. And then there on pages 2 and 3 of that document, there were a lot of other project ideas that had not, at least at this point, had any sense, folks didn't really have a clear sense of the timing, or that was not shared as a part of the description. So there's certainly an opportunity right now to think about, oh, okay, some of these things should be elevated into a short-term bucket or maybe even a long-term bucket. But before we do that, so this is the opportunity really to weigh in on this list. And is this at least a good starting point for the discussion of then, where do we go from here in terms of thinking about who might work on and push forward the ideas related to childcare, or who might coalesce and push forward the ideas related to employment, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a beginning way to organize that, and also to get a sense that as you look at those short-term items, for example, are we missing any of these key outcome areas that we should be focusing on? Is there an opportunity to elevate some of those other projects up into that short-term list? Or are those ideas, or have we achieved the right combination or balance that we think is a priority for short-term needs? So I see a couple of questions maybe potentially already, and so I would love to get some initial feedback. I think our first question is looking at these short and long-term buckets. What are we really missing? Is there something that's missing from one of these key outcome areas that we have not covered that might be lying underneath in that other category or otherwise? So that is a general question to the group, but I know that folks have maybe some thoughts or questions about how this is currently organized.
Sure. So I have Mick.
Thanks. Project Z, as in zebra or Zalatel, should be in the short term because that's actually before the body on 7/28. It's the Volunteers of American Mental Health in Schools.
Thank you.
I should just make that same comment.
Sure. Forrest and then Austin, yeah.
Yep, and so I'm going to, with your patience, I'm going to jump back into that file right now and make sure that I'm capturing that correctly.
Actually, you know what, I think, let's allow us to go first. I need to collect my thoughts here.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thanks. I was just gonna say that before this is sort of shared around, I think you jotted down the names of all the people who brought things up first. But so for those of us who brought things up later and might even be working with these people, our names aren't on there. So to the extent we want to share this, I just want to change that because I think it isn't really representative of everyone's work. Thanks.
And if I might briefly add to that, this might be an opportunity for us, even who aren't working on projects, to put our initials next to the ones that we think we would like to work on, not connected to this is my top priority or this is my last priority, but rather, yes, this is one I want to work on. And then this will help to bubble up, even in this early phase, some shared perspective. And so how I might do that, if I were in your shoes, is just start with the top of the list and ask for people to raise their hand if they would like to be associated with that item. That's just one idea.
Can I get clarification from Austin? Austin, you were saying that some of the projects that we had mentioned, you wanted us to have our names next to those so that we could identify that we were supporting that too? Is that what you're saying?
I was just saying, like, for instance, well, there's a lot of them on here, but they basically mostly have one name. And so the name is the person who brought it up first. But there are other people who have either been working on that or support it. And that if we're gonna produce this to the public, it's not totally representative of our conversation. That's all I said.
I agree with that. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I might just share that that wasn't always shared in the context of the project description. So if I did not capture some of those, yeah, we should certainly, they might be in that unfolded. If you unfold some of these, you have collaborations, so some of those details. So that was just a little trigger for me to understand, but we can certainly add that level of detail. That's a great point.
Can I get back?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have the physical copy, so I didn't realize you could unfold things, but yes. The way I think about this list is, imagine there's a whiteboard, and there's a whiteboard right over there. And these are all just brainstormed ideas up on the whiteboard. So in the same way you wouldn't take a whiteboard and push it out to the public, I don't think this is really a public document. This is a working document in this room. And we're not keeping it secret because this whole thing is public. But this is not the kind of thing I want to push out really in any form. We need to be much further down the road before we sort of put this out into the public, in my opinion. And when that happens, I think you could go one of two ways. You could say, like, here are all the people that want to do this thing, or we just not have any names associated with the different things. We're all going to have to vote on this package eventually, or some version of this package. And that's where we then demonstrate whether we are for this or against it or what have you. And the people that we're really working with know we're working on this. But I don't really like the idea of the initial list that goes out to the public saying, here are these members that care about rental assistance. You know, here are the ones that care about child care. We all care about child care, you know. So my preference would be anything that goes to the public doesn't have these names on it.
Jamie?
I agree with Mr. Dunbar because we're showing transparency, discussing it as a group. But like we heard last night over and over, that what's the plan? Well, we don't actually have them just yet, but at least we're being transparent, and then we're all going to develop it together and come out openly. And I think that's key. Okay. I just want to show it. I support that. I think that's a good idea.
Thanks. Chris?
That still doesn't get to the point, though, what Austin was making originally. Like, I am certainly not the only one that supported public toilets. In fact, Meg had more detail than I did. And so, although I've been talking about the longest for sure, I would want her name to be there. And so, for that purpose, however we get there, I think the top level should be reflective of the people who are most associated with those items.
Yeah, the organization currently is who presented the original description, so appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't think I've no comment. That's okay. Yeah, so I think I really like what's being said. I think that being really transparent, and I mean, this is really messy, but it's also really transparent about the brainstorming and the ideas that are going on. And so I whatever degree we want to share the information, I don't think there's anything here that's secret. This is just sort of a rough. But I do think that however you sort this, right? I just play with it on Excel. If you sort it by the buckets, right? What is in housing? What is in childcare? What is in that sort of thing? That's helpful because then you look at what you're doing in each of those buckets and what's missing. Like, wow, we're doing a lot of things in housing, but we really haven't thought as much about economic development. So that's an opportunity to sort it. Or you sort it by money, and you think about, okay, here's all of the sort of proposed projects. So I think there's some opportunity to think about it from different ways of sorting the information. So, and I think that the question that's in my mind is, what do we do with the rest of our time today? Mm-hmm. And so that we feel like that we've really sort of made some progress towards this. So that's still in my mind.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, one last note to that. We just received this by email, which is a little bit unnerving. What I would like to do before it's sent out again is add a preamble to it that states this is a working draft document based on a conversation and does not mean, whatever that preamble should say, this document is going to get out and it's going to live and it's going to be a tool for people to use one way or the other. So I do suggest that we resend it out with a statement on the top that this is literally just a preliminary based document, not based on anything we intend to do, but what we're working toward.
Thanks. All right, turn it back to Chef.
Okay, so to the question big question is, again, thinking about that allocation framework and those outcome areas. And currently, if you're looking at this list, how close or far away are you to really starting to achieve some of the outcomes areas and addressing outcome areas that are priorities? So currently, if we look at this list for the short-term bucket, and again, with that big preamble that this is all preliminary ideas and brainstorming, you currently have, you've covered the topics of childcare, employment, and I have equity there at some level, health, housing and homelessness, and then the municipal response category. And if you have your framework handy, and if you're thinking about and concerned with how close or far away are we to meeting other outcome areas and which of those are priority, one could be asked the question of where is public safety in this list, or potentially, and maybe that's the only one where we don't have something specific, or even where is racial equity in this list.
There is one.
So, okay.
Mental health first responders, I believe, actually is a function. Mental health first responders is a public safety function directly.
And I think I did put something for first response. Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Okay, and then I guess the question goes out to the rest of the assembly members. Same question as to, are there other areas that have not been covered by either the short or, any of the longer term projects? So are we addressing the outcome areas? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Shelley, I have a question. I'm going to ask the group. I need a little bit of help because when we're talking about small business relief, I think it's intertwined with short term and long term. Because it's trifold. Short term, they need help now, but long term, this is going to help our economy. So I'm trying to find out. So I would like guidance with how you guys want to label. I'm open to any of it. How you want to label it. I would say landlord relief, or how we're going to name it. That would be short term. First responders, I would say that would be short term. Athletics and camps, short term. Mental health, schools, electrician, short term. Well, no, that would be long term probably for mental health clinicians and schools and for PPP. And then I didn't see, maybe I missed it, for the adjustment for the 2.4 million for the senior centers. Is that last page?
Yep.
Okay. And again, I was just going to send out an email back out to Jennifer. I'm going to just say it. It kind of looks like an unprofessional draft because it's such a working draft that I know the public can hear us and see what we're doing, but if we're going to send this could be very confusing of who stands by what and all the numbers. They're like, wait, they're going to spend this much on all of this? Like, it should be more of a consolidation, and I'm concerned about it being sent out publicly.
Can I share something, folks? So
yeah,
this was purposely titled a work session.
Thank you.
So just to reiterate that, and so that's certainly like what you see reflected here is, a brainstorm. If you could imagine this on a flip chart paper, then we might even be crazier than we are at this particular moment. So to the best of our ability, imagine this as a refined flip chart that's got all of those ideas together. And so the question is, are we missing any of the big ideas? And then maybe the next question is, what is the process then for further refining and packaging those into the buckets and the appropriate buckets, and then getting all the detail related to who supports it, what's the dollar amount, who are some of the other collaborators. I think there's just a tremendous amount of detail that will be very challenging to try to achieve in this forum today. So what's the best way to make sure we get at least the big brainstorm list, put that together, and if there are, like you've just done, Jamie, you flagged a couple that you said, hey, those should definitely be elevated into the short-term bucket. Great, let's hear more ideas like that, or areas where you feel like something just didn't hit the list at all. So that helps us to just, again, further refine this so that then you can walk away, if it's in working groups or subcommittees or whatever that looks like, to do the more detailed work. And I do have the list that Felix had shared with me before, where I think you folks took the opportunity to identify, hey, put me down for employment or put me down for health-related things. So I do have that list of assembly members and the areas that you expressed interest in. We can pull that up later to think about next steps. But for now, again, how can we further refine this? I'm happy to and excited to hear additional thoughts or ideas on that.
Thanks. Cameron?
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, there's people looking and seeing this, and that's fine. But I think in terms of releasing something to the public, we need to clean this up and organize it and make it something that, because it would be like someone taking a picture of the flip charts over there. That's not going to be very helpful for someone who's trying to understand what was going on. So, and I know that we will do that. I'm confident in that, and then we'll have the names of people who are interested in working on it, and it'll have proper sort of organization, those kinds of things. So I feel kind of confident about that. To respond to Jamie, anything you do short term is likely going to have long term impact. I mean, it's so I think there's some discipline that would really help in organizing and communicating. Okay. No, that's all right. But I do think that I do think it's helpful to not consistently stick it in two categories. I think it's helpful to say this is intended as an immediate response to something that's going on now. It will likely have an opportunity to have long-term impacts, but that's the intent behind it. The intent behind it is to go, there's something happening right now, and we want to do something about that. And that's what I would suggest we categorize as short-term. And if there's something else that's like, well, it's not really going to address something right now. It's really intended for something long-term, and it's intended to sort of do that. There are things that obviously we'll cross over, but I would just encourage us as much as we can to choose one of the two, because I think it'll be cleaner and easier to both organize and communicate. And the last thing I wanted to share was just, I do think that that in terms of the public safety, I would want to make sure that we're thinking through what kinds of things, especially as we learned earlier in terms of COVID money, that public safety, fire, police, are directly identified within CARES Act funding as something that we can invest in. And so, what are the issues that we're really wanting to respond to short term that are necessary within those? So I'm really curious about that. And then I'll just wrap up by saying I really want to make sure that before we end, we come back to what Meg had said before we left, and that is that historically, at least in my short time on the Assembly, I have seen the administration and the Assembly work at times not necessarily in tandem. There's always a good working relationship, but there's work happening, and so to the degree that we can try to be aware of that and share that in this setting, I think it'd be really helpful, so that I or others don't put in a whole bunch of work when someone else is already doing that. So I would like us to try to communicate that to the degree we can today. Thank you.
Thanks. So I have three folks in the queue. We'll start with Meg.
Thanks. So I want to put a finer point on the timing because I work in really concrete terms. So some of the things in the short term, I plan to bring on 7/28 if they're not already brought. So I'm just going to flag them for you all so you know. The Assembly infrastructure capacity to deal with COVID-19, I will put something forward for the addendum, probably at $250,000.
Are you looking
under short, it's the last one under the short on page 1. The dedicated transportation for mass shelter, I will also put in on 7/28, and probably B as in Bravo, the grants, child care grants to parents, as I described. And all of those reasons are like immediate needs with a little bit of rollout time, except for maybe that shelter transportation. And even that's going to take some time. So I'm really cognizant that I don't think we've seen anything roll out in less than a month. And I'm really feeling the pressure, particularly around school. And quite honestly, around our own time. You know, I think everyone kind of shares that, but, you know, for the public, it's really hard right now to communicate effectively with all of you on such big items and engage with you and do our regular business. And we also have the alcohol tax that we're taking up. So to do it thoughtfully, conscientiously, and do it well, I think we need to make a small investment in ourselves so that we can better represent our constituents.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Actually, I just had a couple of questions. I see that food vouchers are on here in a couple places, and thank you, Sherry, for putting this together. It's really helpful to have this in front of us. Did we capture food, gas, prescription vouchers? I can't remember if I mentioned that. I know that was an ERTF suggestion. I'm not sure if it's embedded in one of these items. And then I guess I would, just really quick, Suzanne, getting food, it was food, gas, and prescriptions. I think I ended up collapsing that into something else, but I can pull that out so it's clear.
There's a food, E is,
Yep.
E is food vouchers.
Yep. And I did add some detail under that one, because I think Forrest originally brought up that concept. Yep, thank you. And then just a couple of quick points on the administration's plan. And Jason, I know you spoke to that a little bit, but I'm just wondering, like, when we might see the next version or the next set of requests, and what that means for, like, what Meg was talking about in terms of taking some of these items and putting them forward. I would like to be able to focus, and I know several people have mentioned that oftentimes several of us are working the same thing at the same time, and also the administration, so I would be very interested in figuring out how we're going to work that out if we can, just so, again, we can be more focused in the next week or 2 weeks until the next meeting. Thanks.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I want to join with Meg on those two items, but I also have two that I believe are short-term needs. One is the toilets. I think we need to just begin that process because people are pooping in the streets right now, and it's a nightmare to my neighbors. And the other one is the $200,000 for Covenant House. There's been this back and forth conversation. They have already spent that money, and they're at risk of shutting down, and they did it under contract with the Muni, and the Muni is saying, wait for FEMA. And so we can get it back from them if FEMA comes through. And so those are the two items I would add to that short-term list, because children are being held safe because of their commitment, and they're at a loss. So those are the two things for me that join the other priorities that Meg has put on the list.
Can you say which letter the Covenant House? Or is it break out of one of them?
Kind of. So it is, M is there, but it didn't include the 200,000. The question about their expansion is a bigger question, and we can have that more thoughtfully. But there's this $200,000 that they spent on the recovery process for COVID. They took in people, they changed their operation, and that is a direct expense. And if FEMA can cover it, we'll go back to it, but we'll come back to the bigger Covenant House question.
I think it actually is in there because it was, the number they gave was 500,000 in their letter. I thought that was covering the kind of expenses you're talking about.
No, but I have the letter that they just sent over.
Another one.
And I asked them to put it all on one page, but the one pager is their expenses, $500,000 for scaling of housing services. Then it's $1 million for affordable housing units, and then $1.5 million for increased shelter and services for young adult, gap group,
right. Isn't that first 500,000? Isn't that what they need? Doesn't that include?
No.
Can they scale up because
that's
of COVID?
That's different, and so that's the wrap. That's a whole other program. They spent $200,000 reorganizing their system to respond to COVID since March 12th. They did it under contract with the EOC, and the EOC is saying, file with FEMA, and then we'll work with you. And FEMA is not opening the gates for anybody. And so we can recapture this money if they get FEMA reimbursement. But this is just to patch them through what they did for us in the emergent crisis.
So what I've done right now, Chris, is I elevated that up and I just gave it a different title, which is Covenant House Immediate Expansion Relief, something like that.
It's retroactive reimbursement for COVID response.
Okay.
Can I get in the queue? Felix, I'm not sure what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get you in the queue. Cameron?
Yeah, just I want to hit the one that Meg was talking about in terms of grants to parents. My concern is my assumption is that that's targeted at parents in terms of school-age childcare. Is that correct, or is it just whatever? And my other piece of that is, if that's true, one worry that I have is just having the infrastructure to even have people available to do the childcare. And so that's partly why it pairs with what I'm thinking in terms of ramping up the agencies that would provide that, the Boys and Girls Club, the campfires, those kinds of organizations, building some quick infrastructure so that there's a place and there's an opportunity and there's people there. And so that's what I want to just figure out if we compare it. So maybe we can talk offline about that. But I want to make sure that if we give resources to parents, that's great. But that we don't have in our community the infrastructure to, I think, to respond to that need. So maybe we can try to figure that.
Actually, really quick, it's actually the 200% and below on the poverty line is actually mostly in-home care or home-based child care. So there is a distinction there. So, but we can definitely connect.
Thanks.
Felix, can you put me in queue?
Sure.
Thank you.
Forrest?
Yeah, so we've not yet accomplished today what I hope we'd accomplish, and perhaps we won't. And what Meg is proposing, while I respect the things that she really wants to go forward, is sort of counter to what I thought we were trying to do. And it's also counter to what the conversation me and Cameron had. For the public, they want to know sort of what is the plan with the CARES Act money. And I think we have one or maybe just a couple moments where we say, here's the big things we are doing with the CARES Act money. And if we do it like one little thing every week, or a couple little things every week, I think the public will lose the thread of what we are doing. And then perversely they'll say you aren't doing anything. You're just sitting on the money or whatever you're doing. Now I don't think it's necessarily counter to bringing some things on the 28th, but I think before the 28th we should try to get to a place where we can make a statement about here are the things we are doing. Here are the big categories that we are funding. And I was hoping we could do that today, where again we sort of go through the nitty gritty and we say, okay, here's all the millions of dollars and what they add up to. Okay, well maybe we can't give you 7 million, so it needs to be 4 million or what have you. And so we can get to these big categories and say, here's the money we're planning to put out on the street. Because if we do this, then it's just a race. I'm going to bring my stuff, she'll bring her stuff, we'll bring a bunch of little stuff, and it won't seem coherent. It won't seem, the public won't have a sense of what we're really trying to do. And it'll also be sort of perverse because we'll all be begging Dean to put it into the appropriate resolution format and that kind of thing. So,
thanks. Yeah, and I think that aligns with a lot of the thinking and discussion that Cameron and I had in organizing this meeting. Can you just, though, clarify before I get to Jamie and then I think Cameron, on sort of the buckets idea, can you just clarify, are you talking about the outcome areas or are you talking about something different?
I'm not sure what you mean, outcome areas. I guess what I would like is if we could go to the public and say, we are putting $30 million into child care, $20 million into rental relief and other short-term supports, and $20 million into contingency. There are also some other programs that relate to economic development that add up to about $20 million. And those are the big categories.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think what you're talking about if you're looking at this is sort of this big top one here. Let's put percentages next to each of them, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't need percentages. I think that's one thing me and Cameron disagree with. I think that numbers are better than percentages, and I think child care isn't in that list. Child care is one thing I want to come out and say.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
But it is on the list.
Yeah,
we talked about that earlier. Yeah, thanks. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
I know that Jamie's next, but I want to respond directly to what he's saying. Is that okay? Unless you're
okay, go ahead.
And would you? I'm sorry, Shelley. Would you just share? Do you have that spreadsheet? Because I just want to use it as a prompt really quick.
Yeah, I do.
Just sort of see if I can get to what Forrest is talking about, because I think it's really vital.
this is just, obviously this is just, oh, sorry.
This is just what I did in a few minutes, but if we could, on the far left there, those are the buckets. And I think one of the things that would really be valuable is, to, for instance, to collapse homelessness into housing or something like that, or collapse so that you have, so there's housing, there's employment, and there's, the fewer the better, but they need to capture all of it. And then to do exactly what you're talking about initially we're looking at around this amount for those main categories. That would be really powerful. It'd be really hard with this group, obviously, because we'd have to agree, right? But in terms of our ability to actually have a cohesive message, that would be really powerful to me. And even if it's draft at this point, it's not commitment, but it's generally speaking, we're looking at committing, X amount of $1 million in these major areas. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thanks. Jamie?
I find myself agreeing with Dunbar a lot. So here's the thing. I will say that coming out with more publicly, with more of, for example, with the athletics in the camps, they might not affect other districts as much as they affect mine. And one of the things is, when I mention athletics, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but with the Arctic Winter Games, it affected kids all across the state, but it really impacted Eagle River and a lot of the kids in Anchorage. Families actually lost more than half of the money that they put in for these children to participate in Arctic Winter Games. So I wanted to kind of break that down a little bit and make sure that there was over 200 families that were affected, and a lot of them raised money, got some from their grandparents and friends and families were donating so that these individuals these children, right, could go to this event. So I wanted to make sure you all realize when I say athletics and camps that this is super important. For those families to actually recover too. And I believe that the least impacted group of persons were union employees, state employees, and federal employees, because maybe, I don't know any state employees that were furloughed, or any municipality, or any federal employees that were actually impacted financially as far as losing their jobs and their incomes. I wanted to put that out there too. So that's why I targeted the small business relief, because it all trickles down with all the families trying to recover financially, being able to pay their personal mortgages and carry on. So, and then the other thing was titling things. So I know that Meg had it titled as tenant relief. I've gotten calls, and some of the folks and emails are like, why are the tenants getting relief? What about the landlords? So maybe we could come together, just pick, I know it sounds super weird, but when you're dealing with the public, we don't want anything that we say to get twisted, and they need to see that we're working together. So if it says landlord relief, then tenants will be like, well, wait a minute. And then if it says tenant relief, then the landlord's like, what about me? So if we could try to pick titles, I know, that actually deliver the message in the title and then a brief description when we're presenting it to the public, this would be really beneficial. And I'm willing to work hand in hand with anything to bring my expertise and just try to get this out to the public the right way, as not kind of piecemealing it, but more of a full message.
Thanks, Jamie. Chris?
Thanks. I would take a stab at looking at your left-hand column and just propose a way to streamline these things. The first one would be families, and that could be child care, and anything related to family home issues like that. Another one would be housing and homelessness, and then finally, the ones we have for employment and economic development, I would just call them all the economy, and that way we streamline down. And then one is there are some municipal responses there. So I think almost all of those can be merged into just 3 or 4 categories. And if we can get closer to that, I think then we start to boil down into real narrative areas that we can start to explore.
And really accessible too, because it's saying families, like supporting families, that's great. Thank you.
And I'm just curious to hear other folks their level of support for that idea. that starts to get us inch closer to this idea of the buckets and the potential percentage or dollar amount or whatever that is.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. I was wondering, Cameron, could you go ahead and just hide the person column?
Yeah.
Because those, as Austin explained earlier. Thanks.
Felix?
I'll be quick because I want to get moving. My goal for today is to have a plan, like Forrest said. And so I feel like we spent a lot of today talking about graphs and charts and things, and like I just want to get to it. So.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to go to Jason, then Kate, excuse me, Jason, then Jamie. But really quickly, so folks on Zoom, I got a request, I guess, to mute yourself, and then maybe it's not Zoom, maybe it's the phone. So if we could just make sure everyone on the phone is muted.
Go ahead.
I just want to make a couple of comments based on everything that's been said in the last couple of minutes. The first I want to go back to is a couple of comments about the Covenant House piece of it, and that we may be getting FEMA. And I just want to alert everyone to what the actual FAQs and the guidance says. And it says, recipients may not use the fund payments to cover expenditures for which they will receive reimbursement. So, anytime that we say we're going to get FEMA reimbursed for this, we can't use CARES. And if we do use CARES, that means we've lost our ability to get reimbursed by FEMA for anything. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that that is actually very clear in the Treasury guidance as well. So broadly speaking, again, I think the administration supports many of these ideas and thoughts. I would just say that it was only a couple of weeks ago that we approved an additional $20 million into child care, rental assistance, and small business relief. We haven't had the opportunity yet to actually really get that out into the community. So I guess I would just caution before we start adding more money into these specific buckets, if we can have some time to actually get these programs out, because I think there is going to be a lot of value in then re-looking at, what impact has it had? What have we learned, and can we better target kind of the next tranche? So at least for these three large buckets, I would just caution and say, I don't know if July 28th is necessarily going to be the best time to kind of put forward another proposal to add to these buckets. Thanks. Jamie?
Is it possible that we could come together as a group? And Jason, I'm asking you this because of what you just said, that we all establish the plan, and just, would it be easier for the administration after we all, let's say we came up with 10. Is it possible and a smarter way of working if we come up with the plan, wait, you dole out what you have to, and then we turn around and we go, here you go, boom, and just let you go boom, 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 and it's done at one shot, and we can just sit back and the public knows it's coming? I mean, I would feel better.
Yeah, I think maybe having kind of a broad understanding that there is a strong likelihood that more is coming. I think the only point that I was trying to make was, we did the initial $1 million in small business grants. And when we came back and asked for another $5 million, there were a lot of requests from the Assembly to more closely target it to groups and individuals that have had more of a struggle accessing some of the other traditional loans or grants from the federal and state government. So that was the only point that I was trying to make, is I think we will learn a lot based on us pushing it out. So I don't want it to make it seem like as soon as we start running low on this funding, that it's going to be exactly the same in terms of qualifications or who we're going to try to target with it. I think we all understand that we will likely continue to put money into each of these categories it might just, who we're targeting and who we're giving it to and what the criteria are is gonna change over time.
Thanks.
Can I follow up? It's just, what my concern is, I think everybody has different priorities, and what I don't want to see happen is that, the priorities are, one's more important than the other type. If we can just I would recommend as a group, we come together, we say, okay, these are our main priorities, meaning maybe there's 10 of them, and then if we release it to the administration to bring them out as simply as possible, strategically, as far as how much one is more for money is the other app we have access to, versus saying small business, like, I'm struggling here, and then someone else saying, but I need to pay my rent, and they're all really super important. And I just want to make sure that everybody's recognizing that they're all so important to each and every one of us, that maybe we can work on saying, okay, they're all important, here's the plan, administration, go ahead and release the funds.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
So I am gonna try to move us along, because my fear is gonna be coming true if I don't move us along. So, which I shared at the beginning, you didn't get that reference. So, I'm gonna go to Chris, and then I'm gonna turn it back to Shelley.
Thanks. And just a response to Jason, Mr. Buckstead, I think the question of the issue of if an expense is reimbursable, we're telling a third party, you need to go get reimbursed, and they're not even being allowed into the portal. And so if we were to appropriate to them with the little clause in there that said, should you be granted funding from FEMA, then you must repay this money, it probably would not cause the cataclysm that you just proposed. And so I think that we can do this, or there are some other alternatives to achieve that goal. But I just want to say, we can be thoughtful about how we achieve this goal.
Absolutely, we can absolutely be thoughtful, but before we went down that road, I would just like Kate or folks in the legal department to just verify that if we put some type of language in there, that is actually correct. I just don't know that.
Thanks, and actually, sorry, Shelley, before I turn it back to you, Ken.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm again thinking about what we do in our next hour and how we get to a place. And the tension I see is the difference between coming out of here with a high-level plan that says that here are some of the major areas that we are going to make sure are priorities for the assembly. Here are maybe some of the set subcategories within those, so people know what family means. That means childcare, it means this kind of things, and that there are there's work going on to really look at what kinds of things. That's all draft at this point. Those are ideas, those are work groups, those are things that are happening around there. So work is happening, and what has already been approved, right? What has already been put through. That's in there as well. So there's a piece of identifying that would be really fantastic, and that I think is the best use of our time today. I think that those of us that want to take action now, and that we want to get some proposals on the table, and we want to get that sort of thing, I feel that too. But I feel like if we don't do that first thing that I said, then we're going to get ourselves into a whole bunch of challenges. And so I think that to me would be a really successful day, is if we could dedicate the next hour to coming to an agreement on what those categories are, what those subcategories are within that, and what are the main proposals that we want to make sure are in there, and knowing that those are draft and that the people involved in them are draft, and that the administration stuff and that we've already done is in there as well. That's my thought. Thanks.
Thanks. Shelley.
Yeah, and so I think that you're partially there. So I'm trying to be sensitive to the frustration, but I also feel like you've done some of that work already, and so it's up here on the screen. It's in certainly the messy version that folks keep referring to in the handout. But here, in terms of those broader categories, if you will, so we had a first pass at that Chris gave us. So you have 3 or 4 kind of key categories right now. We have sort of a mini breakdown of what those categories might include if you unfold them. Potentially an idea of the timing, so some of those are in the short term or the longer term. And then we have some potential dollar amounts associated with specific projects. So you could broadly say right now, we could, here's what roughly what we're thinking about allocating the economy, allocating towards families, allocating toward health, etc. And so, to Cameron's point, is there an opportunity right now to confirm that these broader categories first, those main kind of big buckets make sense, that we collapse them into? We've got the subcategories, okay, and then those projects you really want to elevate and have on that list. So I heard a couple of suggestions for those, which included what Meg shared, that she's going to move forward with the assembly infrastructure effort, or the dedicated transportation, or Chris said public restrooms. So which of those do you feel like you're getting some group support? And so the more than one assembly member is coming forth and saying, this is a priority, this is important to keep on the list.
I think there's one missing category.
Here, you want to list it more?
That's okay. I see one missing category. This list that you have in the spreadsheet doesn't incorporate all the ideas here.
Yeah.
And there's a whole series of projects that we put up there, and we kind of then said we should probably wait on those because they're too specific, but almost all of them fit into the category that I would just call community. Things like the zoo, or like the Heritage Center, or the trail, any of those kind of projects, the stadium, even some of the youth projects. And so I would just add a category that I would broadly call community, and then we don't have to fill in those buckets at this time, but I would put that as the place to reserve some of these ideas that we probably will come to a point on some of them. They're not reflected there yet, so.
Yeah. I said community facilities. Is that too much, or is that broader?
I would just say community, because there could be some things that are less, like we heard, childcare, play ball fields, or sport teams, any number of those things that aren't economic development and jobs, they aren't housing, they aren't families, they're where we come together.
Thank you. Okay, other input or feedback on the broader categories?
I'm trying to absorb it well.
Yeah.
There were a lot of discussion about schools, and I don't know where that fits, if it's families, but about mental health in schools, potentially helping ASD, depending on what their setup is. What else was in schools? I think, pre-K.
Yeah, so we currently have sort of we have mental health first responders, and so we were categorizing it as health, and so maybe that's the wrong bucket.
If I can just add a couple of 2 cents on that. The schools got their own money. I mean, the schools are trying to figure out how to do it. And so my concern is that we're gonna. I mean, I think that we can certainly give them some money, but it's tough to. I don't know. That's what it's tough for me is like the category of schools, when the schools are trying to figure out how to spend their own money on addressing all of these things. And so, that's a tough one. I see pre-K as family, but it may not be. I mean, I guess it's, but it's, I still see that as a family. But I'm okay with the education. I just don't know whether, if we're going to be giving a lot of our funds directly to schools, if that's necessarily where it's going to be directed, or it's supporting families around schools, or whether it's health, because it's mental health, and it's supporting people who attend schools with their mental health. So that's just my thought on that.
Okay. Can you respond?
I was going to respond, but
Go ahead.
I can't do my knife.
I'm fine putting families, that makes sense to me. I will point out that I talked about Bishop, and I think their plan is to, with all the money they got, which is $12 million, to plug their hole that the state screwed them on once again. So, I mean, yeah, we can say, oh, sorry guys, but it's really many of our constituents have families, and there's that need. So I understand what you're saying, but I feel a sense of, I want to be flexible about the issue.
Thanks. So I have Suzanne, then Forrest, and Chris.
Thanks, Felix. I was just going through the list to see the representation of the different areas, and racial equity, I think, has 2 items on it, and I think that's the one that, some of these other areas we spent more time. I guess I just wanted to point that out. I don't necessarily know how to address that one to the extent it ought to be addressed. So
Which one, did you say?
racial equity and the outcome area, the last.
Oh, and an outcome area.
I see 2 items on the project list.
Also the indigenous placemaking project that's like parks and signage that I brought up wasn't added. I didn't see it in here. In the, this draft.
I had that in, placemaking. the
Oh, that's
placemaking
what that
project.
was.
Yeah, yep.
It's kind of like a work project, honestly, so I think that.
Anything else, Suzanne?
Oh, no, that's it.
Thanks. Forrest?
Yes, a couple of things. So I see racial equity being sort of part and parcel in a lot of these. Rental assistance, for example, we know that there's this disparate impact right now, and that would have that effect. Same, the mental health court, there's a lot of stuff that really touches on that. So 2 things. One, I'm not totally sure how things got onto this spreadsheet versus not. It seemed a little, like I didn't see my assistant, the thing that several of us want, the assisted living, for example, it's not on that spreadsheet. And so I would just flag that there's a lot of things that aren't on there yet. And then, but in terms of another big category that I don't think is on there, and it's sort of a one of one, is the contingency fund. That I think a lot of us believe that there's going to be perhaps tens of millions of dollars in some kind of contingency fund, and it's not on there. And it stands on its own.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, that was my comment as well, but I would add a second category to that, as that the expenses we've either already incurred or are close to procuring, like the 21 million we already spent, the 21 million that's on the agenda, the municipal expenses that we have incurred for all of that, and then the contingency. And so I think those broad categories need to be addressed just as a subtraction in parentheses. They're already gone. And so then we can actually get a column. Revenue?
Like the mini revenue.
Yeah, exactly. All of those municipal expenses that are in relationship to the actual emergency, which is covering the shelter, covering all the things we've done. Then we get the column. We have our potential expenditures, we have our available funds, and we can actually start to see the picture. It definitely needs the contingency and the current expenses that we've allocated since we built it. So, and I think we're getting closer. We're closer than we think.
Thanks. Jamie?
So actually, Cameron, when you brought up in regards to the ASD having the funds, that made me second guess what we're going to be doing as far as the PPE. But I guess we can continue to talk about that, because I don't want to pick up the slack where they should actually be doing it themselves. And then the other thing was to Austin. So so the signage for the parks, are we wrapping that when folks are not working, so this could potentially put them back to work? Okay, excellent. I'm just trying to figure out that we do it the right. Okay, thank you. I can't see all this stuff up there at all. It just looks like a bunch of black. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, I don't know what's on it. Is this spreadsheet going to be able for us to look at too without editing, but at least we can see it?
Yeah. We should talk about that process, because I think we're running like 2 or 3 different parallel processes right now. And one of those was just to get a handle on what some of the big buckets are, the messaging that goes to, these are the focus areas of how the municipality will invest its CARES Act funding. And then second is this desire to then say, assign some percentage or dollar amount to those buckets. So this is a preliminary sweep of it, but Cameron literally just sent this to me. And so it's not complete or fleshed out. I did just add the contingency fund of $40 million, but I can't, without taking like a 15-minute break, do a quick breakdown of those dollar amounts right now. We could definitely fill that in and get a better or closer sense to what that dollar amount looks like. So we could flesh this out actually and do a quick little graph or spreadsheet at some point, but I know that that's frustrating for folks, and instead I hear a desire to just be clear about is there some agreement on those big picture or projects. So those where you could look at that short-term list and say, hey, 6 out of the X number of assembly members agree that this is a project that we need to support moving forward. Or, So Meg, I think, I want to hear from you because I can get a sense that you have some comments or thoughts.
Yeah, I'm still uncomfortable. I hate to say it. I'm not getting what's the outcome today? Like, I'm just really frustrated, because I want something much more tangible than, I mean, I understand the need for the overall picture, but I don't have good words for it, sorry, my brain's a little fried. But one thing I want to, I guess, parallel with is, to the extent that I am moved to action, is maybe an agreement or a format, Mr. Chair, for when we bring any appropriations, that there be an AM that uses that work session pre-work from the agenda and indicates the brief description of the project, the potential impact, the cost, and the partners, so that it does tie back in, even if we're not going to, or we are impatient, like I tend to be, so that we don't lose sight, and maybe even somehow, if they're agreed upon categories by the time we leave, we indicate the category. So I'm trying to mediate between myself, the overall desires of the group, and my own sense of urgency. So if you see me over here perplexed, that is why.
Yeah, because you haven't had, I feel like I was going to just respond, because you haven't had, but that's what we're in the, we're right in the sausage making part of this right now and developing the process. So there's also, there's competing priorities to develop the process, but then also to share with the public, like, these are our priorities, without having gone through a process except the on-the-spot live version of that we're doing right now to the best degree possible. And so we've done that by saying, broadly these buckets, broadly, shorter long-term, and then broadly, here and that, not so broadly, but actually some specific project ideas tied to those. So you have that. So I guess I'm trying to get a sense from the folks that want to be more detailed and specific, what is the thing that's missing for you that could make this, that could wash away that fear, so that you're not walking away feeling like you didn't accomplish what you need to accomplish today. So, yeah.
Thanks. So I have Cameron, then Chris.
So I'm trying to be really thoughtful to the different people that are here and the concerns and that piece. I just cannot emphasize enough. It seems really simple, but let's try to get some agreement on the big categories. And let's have commitment out of this room that will use those as the language and the categories for how we're bringing things forward. Let's do that. Whether we need to do a straw vote or what it is, so we have agreement on what those are. And then I think that's a really big step. And then what are the subcategories within those, so that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about economy, when we talk about families. What does that mean? And then let's walk through some of these projects and talk about who's going to be involved in them and generally what they are. That is going to create a framework for us to be able to actually work independently. And it's not going to slow anything down, and it's going to create a whole different way for us to not only work alongside each other, but for us to communicate this to the public. And so I would just really encourage us to try to find some agreement on those.
Thanks. Chris?
I completely agree with that, and I think that one thing that's missing still, and it won't get there today because of the need for more time to do it, is to take all of these projects that were highlighted under these categories that we finally agree on, and some other pool of potentials for hearing from the public once we've decided the categories. But essentially, some what we have as an idea, some what we've expended, and see the number that's 10 times or 3 times or whatever it is more than we actually have, which will then give us a framework for making decisions and also a tool by which we can ask ourselves, is this really a priority because of the limited resources that we have? And so I think, and I don't know how this is happening, I'm becoming the spreadsheet sum it up guy, but that's the missing piece too. And we're not going to get there today. That might be a piece that needs to be with the clerk or with the chair to take this list and take it all together in this framework that we have, that column D, make it accurate, and then as accurate as we can with the estimates. And once we've done that, I think you're 100% right. We have what we need to frame our decision-making process.
sorry, I need to comment on that. So, thanks, Chris. I agree that that is absolutely one of the next steps that we need to take. I also think that, for a lot of these projects, I'm going to be relying on you folks who brought the projects up to help flesh them out. I don't think it should be my job to help to flesh all of those out, which is sort of what I heard, but I don't think that's what you meant.
Let me just clarify. What I'm saying is from this list right here, right now, that we have all of these ideas, somebody should just take them and put them into this so that the document that comes out of today reflects the conversation we had today. Then we see all of this conversations, we see who's going to be on what project and do the work you just suggested. But just for the purpose of this document accurately capturing what we did today, should somebody, I'll do it, send me the spreadsheet and I'll do the manual work, type in this list into this form.
Sure.
So that can be my job because I'm facilitating this conversation and hoping that, and also documenting to the best degree possible. So I volunteer to do that. So we can absolutely do that, but, and I think what we're doing ultimately, to Meg's point earlier, is landing in a place where then assembly members can walk away with clear categories and in terms of, is it a general category of whatever it is, and it ties to specific category, whatever it is, and then what's the at least dollar amount that was posed, or they can then plug in that dollar amount. So they have a real clear framework for plugging in the project proposal.
Forrest?
Yeah, so if that's the outcome today, then that, I think, gets us a little bit closer. So we'll have these sum totals in the list in these different buckets. But if that's what we're going to do today, then so be it. I will say that when you're communicating with the public, you can't just say economy. We're putting $40 million into economy. It has to be we have to find some other language. Families, for example, should probably be family support. If you said we're putting $30 million into family support, that's the kind of thing that's both broad enough, but also concrete enough the public can consume. Economy should be either economic stimulus or economic development, something like that.
I would definitely, yeah.
Health, we have to find another word for that. Not a word, but little phrases that are a little more concrete. So,
Thanks.
Can we keep rolling with that?
Sure.
Yeah, and it's not just, I'm not trying to enter into like a semantic argument. I'm thinking about the way you communicate with the public.
Yeah.
I think housing and homelessness actually by itself, that's a phrase that's fine on its own. Maybe someone else can take a shot at that.
Keep on going.
No, this is great. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because just to take a quick pause, economic development then equals employment, business supports,
right.
Everything under that umbrella. Cool. Okay, then take us to
economics. You need to break it down low, even more. So say small businesses, like really zoom in because you can say economics, but then you can bring it all back down.
Okay.
Right. So there's two.
I think specifics.
No, I got it. But we're not going to get to all the specifics today. But what I think we agreed on is we are going to maybe name the buckets.
Yeah.
And so I think economic stimulus makes more sense than economic development. Even though development is in some cases what we're doing over the long term, I think there's a intense desire in the public to see that we're taking action right now to address COVID.
Great.
So economic stimulus, family support, housing and homelessness, contingency fund, and then health. I don't know, health
investment,
health support, health investment, health and equity. Equity. No, I like health equity. I'm just thinking like if you were to go.
How about health and safety? I mean,
Hey, Forrest. So I have an idea, since I know you mentioned this to me. So can you do me a favor, and can you actually since I love what you're doing, can you take the marker and can you come up here and write your ideas? Because I know you told me that you wanted to do that.
I've already spent on ideas. Ideas are already
I was literally going to type it up onto that because just a reminder that not everybody is in this room right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to type. I'll translate whatever Forrest is doing there with his great artistry onto this.
I've done anything.
Have
you already done this?
Okay, I kind of did it.
Yeah, she already did it.
Economic stimulus.
Yeah. family, just family support.
Family support. Okay.
Housing and homelessness. Municipal response, I don't think we need to put it into the bucket immediately. Contingency fund.
Community investments.
Health and wellness.
Health and wellness is right.
Oh, yes, good, health and wellness.
Oh, thank you. I don't know what's going on here now.
Health and wellness or health and welfare?
And then I heard, community what though? Community,
I call it investments.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Like it. And we
Say
could move
community
racial
investments.
equity to our guidelines. We could move racial equity to our guidelines so that it spans across all of these.
Absolutely.
did everyone hear that proposal? So Cameron was suggesting that we move racial equity that's currently living in the outcome areas, move that from the framework, from outcome areas into your guiding principles or criteria that you use to make decisions about project ideas. So, good?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we have, do I know about where is municipal response? Is that something that we're going to do?
I don't think that means anything to the public.
Yeah,
I think this
I
is
think
all
I-
a municipal response.
Yeah, I think I would probably strike that.
What do you call municipal expenses? These are the sunk costs, things we've already spent.
That's internal.
It is, but we need to reflect it because people are going to say $156 million. Where's the other $30 million you didn't spend? And so that just needs to be reflected somehow.
Yeah, we need to reflect it. I just don't think it's a bucket.
No, I think it's like what is it? It's direct cost from COVID,
Yeah.
right?
Admin.
Yeah, it's
They won't like
40% administrative costs.
What if we call it like emergency response? Like, or, you know, because it was the direct emergency response or direct COVID response. It's our government expense.
municipal response.
Oh, no, we are deciding whether or not there actually needs to be a municipal response.
I was willing to
Right?
hold that for you. I feel like
Yeah.
For my part, I think we actually need to keep a budget for the municipal response to this because we've spent a ton of money and we aren't done spending money yet because we still have to go see, and if we have to set up stage 2 of the Alaska Airlines Center Hospital and all of that, these are the category of expenses separate from the 40 million on other expenses that we know are our costs.
Yeah, but aren't most of those costs FEMA funds, not CARES Act funds? I don't know if Jason could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those are potentially FEMA, but I think to Chris's point, there is a 25% local match that is typically required for those types of things. Now, historically, those have been covered by the state, but we don't know if they will do that in this instance. So I think we do need to potentially set aside, 25% of whatever we are potentially asking for FEMA reimbursement, which we're estimating.
I just
10 million at least.
that when the earthquake happened, FEMA wanted to reimburse everybody at 5% of what they were owed. And it took an act of Austin Quinn Davidson going to Congress to get them to fund people what their money was worth, and it was like an act of God. And so if we're going to depend on FEMA, an act of God, so sorry, for sure. If we're going to depend on FEMA, we're doomed because FEMA pays only when they feel like it. And so we need to take care of our municipalities.
Can we wrap it into the contingency fund? Can we just add that as part of the contingency fund?
No, I think that's different. I think we want to keep that different because we don't know what the contingency fund's going to be spent on. I would call it something like direct coronavirus response or something like that.
I like it.
Well, why don't we call it the COVID-19 plan between municipal and response?
I'm
So
sorry.
I'm going to go to Meg and then to Jamie because I think they both have suggestions.
So I would just add between municipal and response, COVID-19, like just add that since it provides the frame of what response we're talking about. We're talking about direct COVID response. I mean, that's what everyone keeps talking about.
Thanks. Jamie?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like the Anchorage COVID stimulus plan, but municipality stimulus plan, because stimulus has that key too in there. The other thing I wanted to say is it's a 25-75 split. So as far as FEMA is concerned, they usually will come back with 25, 75 for federal dollars. And we have to come up and put up the 25, whether it's us or the state. The other thing I wanted to say is that, just for clarification on the FEMA thing, so we understand that, when you're dealing with FEMA, you have to realize they're not there to make you better. So if your garage door fell and it was already kind of barely making it, but they put it back up for you, they're not there to make you better than, they're only there to make you whole. So they're not, if your carpet got damaged or certain items, they're not going to go bring in carpet that's $20 a square foot. They're going to bring in $2 worth of carpet per square foot. So they never will let you profit off of anything. Just to clarify that on that. Are those going to be our top 7? Is that it for us?
I don't know why you're asking me.
Since you're the one up there with the market.
I know. I mean, those strike me as, I was just thinking about this, those strike me as 7 buckets. If we were saying this is what our overall plan is, I think almost everything we talk about could be fit in there. So I do like this framing. The only thing is I'm still grappling with health and wellness. I'm not sure if that's actually capturing what we're trying to do.
What if you put mental health?
No, it's not just mental health, it's like public toilets and things like that.
I think it's more health and safety or health and, it's what keeps coming to mind, it's a federal title, but it's health, education, and welfare. This broader category, but I think safety isn't reflected here.
No, it's not.
And that's the category.
Health and public safety.
Health can help.
Well, I like health and
Not just public
safety.
safety, but safety.
Well, wouldn't it be public?
Yeah, well, so public health and safety is a moniker that's used in the Anchorage complaint. So I don't see why we wouldn't use that here.
And public health and safety is great, but public safety means police, ultimately. And I understand, and so
Well, what did you use first?
Right, so you put public before the health.
Yes. And
Yeah,
safety.
public health and safety, I like that a lot.
So what this means is that the allocation framework itself, this will change. So these categories that we have for outcome areas up top, those get swapped out with these more refined, more focused categories. So I think that also helps you to then put your project idea into a specific bucket, or maybe has overlapping buckets.
This is a really small thing, but can you swap COVID-19 and can you put contingency fund at the bottom?
Yeah.
Because that's how
It's
human
like
beings think
what's
about
left
it.
over, yeah. Also, I don't like COVID-19 municipal response because all of these things are that. So could we put direct municipal or something that I know we already have.
Direct COVID-19 expenses.
Yeah,
something like
that's
that.
great. That's perfect.
That doesn't seem very,
Actually,
not
direct
municipality.
municipal
Can you do Anchorage
expenses.
municipality stimulus plan?
No, it's not stimulus, direct.
No. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Municipality,
I like
COVID-19.
that.
So, yeah, and I think just to get to what this bucket is about, right, it's basically about what direct expenses are we as a municipality, the government, taking on, right?
expenses instead of response.
I like it.
That is
Expensive.
the AMSP. We like to sit an acronym. AMSP, Anchorage Municipal Stimulus Plan. I don't know.
You like DMCE? It sounds like a military acronym.
Sounds like a rap.
That does sound good too, therefore.
Okay, so the one that.
Yeah, 40 million is a little bit rich for my blood.
Yeah.
We're going to debate that number.
Well, and so here's a first pass, okay, here's step 1, and then further, if folks are in agreement, I guess, can I see that? How do we feel about these broader categories?
As long as you take that dollar figure. Yeah, the
dollar
So I just shoved that in there as the next step. So these, if we got those broad categories, because again, my understanding is you don't want just the broad categories. You also want to be able to say, roughly within these categories, we're headed down this path with this $156 million.
And just so it's clear, could we take out the extra detail for the first two?
Yep.
Do we need to move to extend? Is it notice till 4:30?
That is true. This meeting is noticed till 4:30.
I
We
think
changed
that-
the notice to 5?
I think
Great.
number 6, honestly, should almost come up at the top because it clearly states what we're doing, like direct municipal COVID-19 expenses, and then all what we're gonna probably do below it. I kinda like that. Unless you're because nothing's being prioritized, right? We're just kinda.
I guess it's
It's a little bit more nuanced than that, I think, Jamie. It's that, the direct municipal COVID expenses are our FEMA contingent.
Oh, so we're gonna break those down too. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
I think.
I have a question, actually. So the only outcome that's the people who suggested ideas concerning education, then it goes under family support?
I think that's what folks were saying, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And I think you're just getting to the point that these need to be then further defined when they get communicated to the rest of the universe. Yeah.
So, I think the best thing to do rather than any kind of vote is to say, because I interject in this framework, and then there's no vote, it's kind of a simple poll.
Yeah.
And then I was in the queue a long time ago to suggest what I think one of the next steps might be, which I'm sure you've already thought this through. But once we get this, just this part incorporated, what I recommend we do is have a work session where we take this framework, and we might have another meeting before then to get numbers or whatever, but ultimately we put a resolution together. And by resolution, we state these are our priorities. We can circulate that out and publish it by our process so that it becomes a formalized document.
Are you suggesting a public hearing on that document?
I'm not necessarily suggesting a public hearing, but we could. We have that right. And so at this point, I'm just suggesting that we should craft a resolution through a work session process that gets us to the point where this becomes the official policy of the municipality.
Thanks, and I guess I'll just officially state that I did suggest the public hearing on the document.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess understanding that there are two branches of government administration, does that look good to you?
Sorry.
Basic question.
I mean, I certainly will want to share with others and get others' thoughts in the administration. But yes, I mean, I think broadly speaking, these are all the different categories that I think we can all agree on where we want to make investments from the federal stimulus that we're receiving.
There's at least one other person in your administration that you might want to talk to first.
What are these called?
We were calling them outcome areas within this framework. And, you know, is that the right term or not the right term? And so
I don't think the public knows what outcome
It's
area is.
priorities.
Yeah.
It's priorities.
So when we say priorities, do you think the public is going to think 7 priorities, which is your actual priority? Like, are they going to want us to prioritize the priorities?
And what I was going to suggest is before this document sees the light of day outside of this room, again, we put some form of a preamble on it that states whatever the basis of that is. This is our set of areas we're going to work on, and we're going to put this out for input. We want to hear what your thoughts are under these ideas. And so, but whatever we do, we can't just put this out. We have to explain what it is very clearly on the top.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that they're outcomes. They're not outcomes. They are priorities, and I don't necessarily think that it's going to mean that. I don't think we not number them first of all. We put bullets in places of the numbers, but I mean I can come up with a different word, but I don't think outcomes, because outcomes requires a measurement and all kinds of things. But so I right now for a placeholder, I would suggest for priorities.
Okay.
And if I might, outcomes that we're looking for are a recovered economy and a healthy community, and schools and kids and families that are taken care of, and ability to respond quickly in a crisis to the needs that show themselves. But now, when we get closer, have the tools by which to make those decisions.
Great. So I think we might be ready for the next step.
Okay, so what is that next step? So that is the question, because then you have some suggested ideas for these packages. And so we, in essence, would come back to your friend, the spreadsheet. Or if you're feeling more excited about, or this list, which starts to then categorize and give you an idea of some of the dollar amounts related to these different packages. And so let me just refer this again. Because again, is the idea you've got your broad or your priorities identified, so related to economic stimulus, related to family support. There's some, we literally probably need to take the time to relabel these, right? You have a whole bunch of ideas that you've presented today. So I want to understand, like, is it going to be satisfactory to say our next step is really to do that work?
and to go through the detailed list that you shared today and take a first pass at slotting these items into these priority areas, instead of trying to do that as a big group right now. I would suggest that that could be a more effective, productive use of your time, and instead we agree on a process and some next steps and not try to hash through those details right now. And I see some folks that are nodding, and so that might be, and so then we can talk about the details of what that will look like, but want to get a sense that you're on board for that.
Thanks. Cameron? Yeah, so knowing that we have a group here that likes to share when they're given the opportunity to share, and we have 25 minutes left. One suggestion is we go around and we have people share their suggestions about what the next steps are. What next do we need to do in order to get us to the next step? Because then we can close our meeting, right? We can share closing thoughts. We can share whatever reflections we have from this meeting, and we can share our ideas for what our next steps should be, and that could get us to the end of the meeting. And I don't want to do that in place of that, but that's my suggestion. Okay, Cameron, I'll get us started. Okay, so I am incredibly proud of this group. I think that this was painful and challenging, but I have not seen this group actually come to an agreement like this in a while, and it's really, really cool. And so, and I think the amount of work that was done was substantial, because the amount of projects and ideas that are out on the table are significant, and it's not even close to probably what's coming. And so I just want to take a moment to say how proud I am of this group, and how I feel like that this was a really good use of time. And then in terms of my suggestions on next steps, I think having a smaller group work with Shelley to be able to refine this information, put it into a document that really tries to capture what was discussed and worked on here today, and sharing that back out to the group is a really important next step. I also think defining what each of those things are and those priorities, so that we all have the same definition for what that means, what kinds of things fit within that, and putting something together in terms of all of this information, so that we can have a working document to take a next step and really fill it out. And then I would agree with Chris's suggestion to come forward publicly when we're ready, to be able to say, here are our priorities, here are the things that we're going to be working on. And I know we're all exhausted. I'm exhausted for sure. But I feel like at least that this was a good use of my time. So thanks everybody.
Thanks. Let's go ahead, just go around.
So it's next steps, right, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm spacing out a little bit.
Reflections and next steps.
Okay, we got to somewhere I'm happy with, although this is always against my brain. I will freely admit that. And my next steps are really to honestly drill down in the proposals that I've been working on to get them forward, especially if I said they were short-term or urgent, because there's a lot of work to do for each one of them. But to frame them now in this framework, so that when they're brought, they will fall within the framework that we've now mostly agreed upon. I think that might be it for now. I guess maybe also talk with people about this framework a little bit, so that they're familiar with what we're utilizing, in terms of the public, knowing why if we do an AM or something, it says a particular priority. So that's it.
Yeah, if we were the state legislature, this would begin the period of wheeling and dealing. Actually, we would have already been doing that. We would be all talking to each other and trying to horse trade for different priorities. We, for better or worse, are prevented from doing that by the Open Meetings Act. So over the course of the next few weeks, I'm going to try to be conscientious in not violating the Open Meetings Act and not going to every person talking about every issue. But I do see a couple of here where clearly there are these groupings where clearly because of what's happening in, with the homelessness issue right now and the night after night that we're doing it, I don't think we have time in our lives to do this again, which is unfortunate. But that's all the thoughts I have right now, and I will, if I have any epiphany, I'll be sure to share with the group.
I would like to do this again. I'll make time. If anybody else wants to, I really, really want to do this again. I think we got a lot from it, and I think we can expand upon our thoughts. I'm ready to move forward. Any white papers on these projects, and I have analysis on some of these other projects, especially the small business relief. And I already have a white paper on the athletics and the camps. My white paper on the business relief is halfway there, and I am ready to wheel and deal to get some of the things I want to go forward to. So I hope, yeah, and by the way, this is the first time I've ever been in a room with most of you, but I'm still missing the other part of the team too. So hopefully eventually within the next 3 years, I will be able to be in the room with all of us together.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. And thanks for putting this together. And it sounds like, Cameron, you had a big role in this, and Forrest as well.
I did not.
No?
It was Chris's idea though originally.
Okay, well, this is great, and really appreciate Esteem Tip being in the same room, and Shelley too. So, my mind always thinks in terms of priority rankings, costs, and feasibility, and the analytical piece, and so clearly, I think as been pointed out, there's a need for consolidation and information, whether it's white paper, and I'm just unsure at this point where to focus. I think the natural inclination is for us to focus on some of the things we brought up, but again, there's a lot of overlap. So we're pressed for time, but if there was any way to do something like this again, it seems like ultimately, go slow to go fast, that might be the most efficient way to go about it. So I think this has been really productive, and thanks you all for doing this. I feel like we've got a really good framework to move forward.
Thanks. So, yeah, for my part, I will say, big thanks to everyone for being in this space and being willing and able to openly share and have the conflicts and being able to figure out the best path forward. So I really want to thank everyone for that. So for me, next steps look like continuing to work with Shelley and Agnew Beck to refine the framework. I think we got a lot of great work done to refine this. And then what I see is a lot of great proposals that we need to take some time to finesse, get those dollar amounts. And then, I think I largely agree with what Mr. Constant said earlier. Now, begins the tough work of going through each of these and figuring out what our priorities are within all of these different buckets, and what does that look like? How do we do that? I do think, just based on what happened today, this may be the best forum to get that done. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks everyone who organized this. I think it's really helpful. Particularly impressed as always just with all of my colleagues' ideas and all the work everyone's been doing. So that's super cool. I think we should do this again. I was looking at our calendar. We have work sessions on the 24th. I don't see how we could do it next week other than that.
Saturday.
There is Saturday. Tomorrow's available.
The peak day of the year.
So I don't know with the 28th and how, folks maybe we're going to come out on what we're going to do there. But, if we don't do something on the 28th, perhaps we could have a work set. We don't have anything scheduled on the 31st right now, I don't think. So anyway, looking forward to meeting again.
If we can create, a July 32nd or something like that. But we'll make time.
Oh, we do have stuff on the 31st, but it's rules committee, this is kind of rules committee.
Can I just say one last thing? I just want to encourage everybody, and I know you probably all feel the same. I just want to move as quick as we can and to get together as quick as we can, because then we can get this out. These people really, they need help. When I say these people, I mean our communities need help.
Thank you. So a few reflections. A couple weeks ago, I was having a chat on a matter between Felix and Austin and I started just going back and forth with ideas, and Felix was like, hey, it's getting hot. And ironically, neither of us were hot. We were just having ideas go back and forth, fast and furious. And for whatever it's worth, I didn't see conflict here. I felt tension, and it was creative tension and a good process by which we are moving through this. And so for my part, if I caused you whatever, that's just the way I am. But I actually felt inspired by you all. And I actually had a moment where I'm like, I think back into a lot of projects with groups in college that were a total waste of my life. And this was the opposite of that. This was like, oh my God, we are literally plowing our way to a resolution that's going to stimulate our community back to life. And so the work we're doing right now is flipping brilliant. So, I agree we need definitions and we need rough budgets, but I also think we need to take an unusual and additional step, which I previously talked about, and that's put together some kind of a basic survey that may not go to everybody because they're not on Facebook, but we can figure out ways, send it to our community council people, take this list of priorities and send it out to them and say, you have 10 days to get your ideas back to us. And I would bet you that the ideas that come back to us are going to fall pretty closely to the ideas that we've already framed up in here. That piece of information will be very valuable to us as we do convene the next time to take the final leap into what are we going to actually do. One project that Meg proposed that I think is very essential to all of us for this is the item that she put on there. Let's see what it's called. Assembly infrastructure investment for capacity. So what that means, like we're all tapped out. We're all working. The clerk's office has been to 6 meetings in the last 4 days. We don't have the actual staff capacity to help us manage this process right now. And so what Meg's argument is that we should hire some people to help us manage this process. And so that isn't a let's wait till August idea. That's a let's get this done now and figure out who it might be. It could be more work with Ag and Beck. It could be another couple steps. Dean could use an aide to help us navigate the madness of all this because we're about to embark on a major process. And so I would argue that a major first step is for us to get the help that we need from a staffing perspective that focuses only on COVID response for the next 60 days or 90 days or whatever. And so that proposal that Meg has made is an absolute essential one, I believe. Separate from all the other very important priorities, we need assistance to move forward. So my next steps are get us the help, the human resources to do the job that we need to do some public outreach with our framework, and then get our butts back together after we've seen all of these items put together in a list so that they're there as best as possible. And we can start to see the big picture with numbers and with expenses from the administration that we anticipate or have already spent under that category 6. And other than that, I am honored again to serve with you people. This is amazing.
Great. So I just want to see really quick, he hasn't responded. Pete, are you with us still?
Yes, I am.
All right. Go ahead, Pete, if you want to share.
Thanks, Felix. I agree with a lot of stuff that my colleagues have said. I just want to emphasize the importance of getting some of this money on the street as soon as possible. The people who've got rent due are going to be worried about being evicted. That's something that has to be a top priority. And there's people that are, still have problems with food access, having enough funding to buy enough food to keep themselves and their families fed. So, it would be great if we had enough time to have more meetings to whittle down our list and make it more concise. But some of these items I just think it's extremely timely to get the funding out there as soon as possible. You know, and one of the reasons Congress passed this was to get the money out into the economy, not only to help people, but to help the economies, be revved up at least a little bit. And so I think somehow we need to move this forward more rapidly if that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks. Shelley?
Okay, so what I'm hearing is definitely the...
sorry. I keep forgetting 2 branches of government. Jason?
Yes, go for it.
You know, yeah.
I would just throw out there that obviously we are always happy to attend more meetings and talk about these items. But I think from the administration's perspective, I would just offer up as our thoughts on the next steps in terms of I think we can very much help with the process of meeting with each of you to discuss kind of what your ideas are, because I think one, we're going to have to work to fit all of these ideas into the actual reality of how much funding there is available on the one hand, but also the capacity at which the administration can work through these once we have actually gotten agreement on what it is and how much and all of that. So we definitely want to work on kind of coming up what is and developing what is that implementation strategy. Because again, as I said, we're going to be the ones that are going to have to try to do that, and I think we can all agree, because every single member has said, we want to get this out there as quickly as possible. So I would just offer up that we're willing to work and kind of come up with the next steps and help the members kind of refine what these ideas are, because I think, as I've also said, we're working on the same things, and we're happy to help.
I just, again, want to reiterate to you and through you to the mayor, the amazing experience of us working together on this. My 3 years plus on the body, I think this is the first time we have really collectively tackled a problem. It is major. We've done a lot of stuff where we are coming together, but this really feels like we are a team. And you committed to work with us, and that commitment is proving true. And that is honorable. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm hearing as the desired next steps includes taking this initial work into those priorities areas and really starting to flesh out in a spreadsheet form or whatever it is how those different project ideas fit into the different buckets. The one question that I have for you folks is there still, as has been mentioned already, a lot of missing. So we're going to improve the framework, update it to reflect what we've already discussed today. But there's still a lot of missing dollar amounts related to a bunch of projects. So I'm not sure if I heard exactly any proposals for, we can put this into a framework and show that there's a gap with that dollar amount, and then pass that back to the assembly as a whole and say, hey, to be determined. Yeah, to be determined. And so that can remain kind of a question mark, because that will definitely hold us up to try to get cost estimates from everyone, because I think some folks were coming from really high level with their ideas, and some folks had fleshed those out considerably with other partners over a number of weeks. So that's one thought. So certainly I can work with a small group of folks to help flesh out, populate into our new framework what we're looking at, any additional questions, and then I guess the other thing is, and how soon that can happen, and does that happen with, we flesh that out and we come back together, is it actually, are we wanting to do a work session or not do a work session? So I was hearing kind of like, it's really important, reiterated a number of times, but not, yep, we can come into that and that really needs to happen to push this to the next level.
So Meg?
So I'm the one with the greatest sense of urgency so far as expressed. I will pull back a little bit if we can have a commitment for another probably all day, where we are actually ready to line stuff up for the addendum for the 8/11 meeting. We have the one before us, of course, and the one with regard to our capacity. I would say those two are kind of the only two I'm wavering on, but then the other ones, I will cool my jets a little bit if we can get that commitment to do that.
Thanks. Forrest, another timeline point. One of the critique, we are obviously going through a shared experience right now with regard to public testimony. And one of the things we are repeatedly hearing is, this is all you're doing with the CARES Act money. You decided to give it all to the homeless, which is, we know it's not true. But we're going to probably take some action on that item either next week or the week after, I would imagine. It would be nice if we could get some version of this out into the public before we take that action to say, here are the big categories we're going to be putting a lot of money towards before we take that action.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. That's intent to get that out quickly. Chris?
I agree with that, and on top of that, we should be publishing very loud and clear. These are the things we have already funded.
Yeah.
And so we haven't done a good job of communicating to the public, but we have appropriated millions. And so we should do that. But I do think that the appropriation for our infrastructure support is something we should move on in this next meeting. Because every day we don't have support is a time we don't have help. And what that support looks like, we can talk about over the next week. But I think that Meg's idea is 100% what we need. We're all maxed out. And we don't have the 3,000 number corporation to support us. And so we need that help. So other than that, though, yes, let us come up with a communication plan that tells the world what we've done and ask the world what they think we should do at the same time. And hopefully before we take a vote next week.
Yeah, or maybe, yeah.
No, go ahead. You can. Austin?
Well, I was going to mention that, we have this $150,000 meant for communications. And so I was going to ask Jennifer if she could potentially add to the scope of work she's putting together communications about COVID and about our response and what we've been doing. That's a good avenue to kind of share that. And then Felix asked me to bring up, well, why don't you bring it up, Felix? Because I think you're better prepared to do that.
Sure. Yeah, I really want to thank, and then actually, after I'm done talking, just to prompt him, I'm going to go to Jason just to get the administration's perspective on what we're proposing. So, yeah, we really want to thank folks for bringing up, the fact that we need more supports. And, the budget that the clerk's office is putting forward, is sort of doing little by little because, within the constraints that we have, current budget, we can't balloon up to the level of support that we really should have as an assembly. So I really appreciate the creative idea of using some of this CARES money for us to get the level of support that we need now for the purpose that we have before us. So I think that's important. And then I'll continue looking, at least for as long as I'm chair, at how we can keep supporting and sort of growing our own infrastructure of support so that we can better do our jobs. Because, I'll say this on the floor when we eventually vote on the AO66, but we only have so much time in the day. We can only communicate so much, right? So we need help, and I hope that the public takes that the right way when we, and hopefully all of us, say that. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
What is the question?
Sorry, so the framework that Meg had suggested in terms of the timeline. So Meg, if you say the timeline one more time for Jason.
In terms, the timeline of my compromise. As long as we were to meet hopefully before or close to the beginning of August all day. I would think the 31st was possibly tossed out so that we can bring our proposals forward for the addendum on the 11th. I think is our addendum deadline for CARES. Whatever the Friday before the 11th is would be our addendum deadline.
And sorry, just to make one point clear before you respond, Jason. So that sounds sort of like far away, just acknowledging what people have said. But I think just, understanding there's a ton of work to do between now and when we meet, so it's not really far away.
I think we can make that happen.
Can I ask one more question, just so I understand? Co-chair. So are we saying that Jennifer is going to be able to maybe do like a press releases or something so the public knows where we're going? When you're saying to add to the communication with the community, so they know where we're going, how do we do that?
Sure, sorry, if that wasn't clear. So in some meeting, we discussed how there was $150,000 left in the assembly budget, and that we all discussed using that to communicate. We've been sort of within the last year or more talking, about homelessness, but other issues that we feel we don't have the infrastructure to communicate well with the public. And like what's happening right now at the assembly, there's so many emails, there's so many things, we can't get the information out fast enough. And so there's this money left over, and we all talked about using it for a communications contract where we could hire someone who could be doing that work, getting the word out there, whatever. So Jennifer is managing that project, and Chris and Meg and I are the communications subcommittee. And so we have been with Felix brainstorming ways that we could use that contract to benefit the entire body and tell the story of what we're doing. So I was just suggesting that since Jennifer's drafting the scope of work right now to put out for RFP or whatever the acronym is that's appropriate, to include that, to include the work that we've done on COVID and COVID response, and to Ben's point.
And sorry, before I go to you, Chris, I think I need a motion to extend. Do you think we can actually get done in like 15?
Yeah, I just
Sure.
need a clarification on the real solid concrete next steps, so I just
Sure.
want to run through that list one more time, and that I think will be beneficial for everyone.
Got it. So can I get that motion?
So moved.
Second? Yeah. Can I get a second?
Yeah.
Second from Zalatel. Any opposition? Seeing none, we're extended to 5:15.
And the only thing that was missing from all the things that I heard was the resolution of public hearing that would detail out what we're going to do, which would be a partner to whatever appropriations may come on the 11th, because we want it at the same time. So that's one more item for the specific list.
Okay. So what I hear, and I'm maybe confused about the communications piece, because the RFP process that's going to take a while, isn't it? Yeah, so I heard a bigger sense of urgency from you in terms of communicating sooner. What are the big priorities, those 7, what did we say? 6 or 7 buckets that you identified earlier today. So unless I'm misunderstanding that there was some because you're about, it was to Forrest's point earlier, that you're about to do this vote, and so folks are standing there saying, hey.
Because I think she'll know.
Well,
Right?
I mean,
Sure, if you want to make it, I think I also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think what Forrest and others have been talking about, in terms of what do we need to get out sort of ASAP,
Right.
is this framework updated with those priorities, right? And how are we making our decisions? Because I think that's what folks are wondering. They're asking us, how are you making these decisions?
Gotcha.
And this is how I think folks will understand it.
Okay.
Can I weigh into it?
Yep.
I think, Shelley, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were referring to the infrastructure, whatever thing that May had suggested? No. Okay.
No.
I might briefly, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sure.
So I think there is time required to get a solicitation out on the door, or on the floor. We have a lot of things to do in the short run. This raises the question, Carolyn or Jason, does the administration have a contracted communications team or some other recommended vehicle that we could hijack for a couple of weeks as we get our business in order to tell the story, what we're doing, or just help us get the message out? Because, it's important that we get started now, telling the public what we're doing.
I'd love to hear the administration's thoughts, and then I also have my own thoughts on that.
Probably not going to get Carolyn to say anything. look at the contract to see if if it's only the executive side that is allowed to access that. If not, I don't see why we couldn't figure something out.
Thanks. And then, so my own thinking on this, and just sort of going back to some prior work where I've asked folks, hey, I need help organizing and getting communication out for the alcohol tax town halls, and I asked folks, okay, can I borrow your aides to do that? So what I'm thinking, and maybe this could work in concert with the administration, is using that money. And I don't think all Assembly members use that money, right? That would be a quick and easy way for us to bring people on, and then, you know, if you all trust me, having me sort of manage that group of folks so that we could do this kind of communications work.
And my only concern, this is no reflection on you, but past performance shows that we aren't effectively reaching out past certain circles, you know, and so my hope is that we are able to break through the circles that we know well and work with into that broader system. And so you can do that. I would trust you to do that, but that has to be the framework by which we're trying to achieve. Let's hit our friends and allies in the places we go. Let's break way past that and hit as many people as we can in this community with this is our mission, our method, and here's your opportunity to tell us.
Yeah, that's it. So I was just going to capture it. Can I go ahead and grab that one? Okay. Yeah, that's the thing that you want to do after you've had your next work session, when you've really firmed things up. And so that's what I have on the next list, and the items of next steps is to get together, you know, with a smaller group of people to really flesh out, like, what does that revised framework look like, and then what are the priorities tied to that framework.
I have to intersect. I think that's backward, though. So we just came up with these categories. We're going to start investigating. If we firm up our categories to the point where we're ready to appropriate, then we have just done a kabuki dance of asking for input. But if we can, between now and October or August 1st, do that outreach and get a pile of input, then we've actually sought and had the opportunity to incorporate into our proceedings the input from the public before we get to the public hearing and the action. And so I just would offer, I'm hopeful that we can very swiftly take these 6 priorities and ask the public, what do you think? So it's slightly different than what you said.
Sure. Okay. That being said, then we would still have the opportunity to conduct a second work session where all of this interim work would be fleshing out the priorities and at least providing that to the assembly for consideration of repackaging or reprioritizing or whatever the case might be. And then you're doing that. You're really preparing yourselves. You have the tools you need to prepare your priorities or share your priorities on August 11th. So the details about that, I think we have to think about that offline, about how those specifics, but anything in that list of next steps that's not resonating or that I got wrong?
I would call it adopt the priorities. This is one way to adopt as opposed to share. It's adopt.
I don't love to even say adopt. I think you have to just bring the priorities.
Bring, yeah, fair enough. Present.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Forrest is doing a good reminder. I'll say it louder. By the 11th,
Hopefully, we're actually doing more than just the priorities. We're also possibly bringing funding items. That was my intent. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's the intent. So between now and the 11th, we're dollars, ideas, etc.
Yeah, this is really present priority projects. So that have been.
I mean, ideally, I don't think we'll ever have a complete plan, but some, like, let's say it's $150 million, like $80 million on August 11th. Yeah. Some of that might be the contingency fund, but like a good chunk of the plan, I think I want to be able to vote on by August 11th.
So I just want to say though that there are 2 different documents at that meeting. One is a formalization of our priorities through the public hearing and all the input we sought. So that's one tool. And then one tool is the appropriating document that is based on what we've established as our priorities
agreed, yeah, and that's how I've been interpreting it.
Can one logistical question for the clerk, and trying to remember, she's not. We appropriate through a resolution, but can you have a public hearing on the same day you bring a resolution?
Yes, Dean has instructed us clearly, a resolution does not require a public hearing. So if you opt to have a public hearing, you can do it the same day.
Okay, because I do think we should have a public hearing on that.
However, we will publish it in advance. It doesn't have to be 2 weeks in advance. We can give a week's notice, we can pick the day and publish it. And so, but the requirement is only you can do it.
I would like to have a public hearing, but I don't want to introduce it on the 20th.
So Dean, hopefully you're able to listen to this. Could you do me a favor and could you, I guess via email, or unless you can talk right now, could you weigh in on this? Actually, considering the time left, maybe you could just email us on this topic. That'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything else, Chad?
No.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. This was great. A lot of work, and we got a lot more to do. So I'm going to go ahead and gavel us out.